I will be relatively brief in my opener here. I do appreciate the fact that you give members of this board the opportunity on a rotating basis to kind of introduce themselves and introduce their work. And I think it's a great practice of this board that you've brought to it. So I am an executive director of the HAC. I'll say a few things about myself and then talk about the work. I've been serving in this role as the agency head for the Higher Education Coordinating Commission since its creation in 2013. So going on 11 years this fall, and it's been, one of the more rewarding parts of this has been to see the increased engagement in workforce development that our agency is participating in part through the support for the WTDB. And I want to really acknowledge the great leadership, not only of Chair Mercereau and her predecessors as chairs, the executive committee, and all the members of this governor-appointed board. You have an important role to play that I'll say more about in a few minutes. Also want to thank our staff. So again, at the HAC, we do a lot of things. One of them is to staff this board. And so Todd, as director, working in the Office of Workforce Investments, the HAC that Julia Steinberger leads, Sydney and her support for the board. I know this is it's a big deal to pull off these meetings on such a regular basis and produce all the materials, get public notices out, et cetera. So we've got a great team at the HAC, and I'm only kind of scratching the surface of folks who longer term members of this board are really active in supporting you and supporting the state in workforce development. Prior to coming to the HAC, I served in the state legislature and worked for the Governor Kitzhaber for a couple of years. So come out of the sort of policy and elected politics world, always with an interest in education and increasingly in post-secondary education. I was a teacher, grades 6, 7, and 8, so have some of that elementary and middle school education background, but love that I get to do this work in a way that spans both the policy making and then the implementation, support for boards and commissions, et cetera. Let me say a few words about kind of how I think, or how we at the HEC think about workforce development, higher education. So our agency, the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, it's an awkward name for a couple of reasons. One is that the name of our agency is Higher Education Coordinating Commission, which right off the bat sets people a little into confusion, right? Are you an agency? It doesn't say department, it doesn't say agency. So just to be clear, I report to another governor-appointed board, the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. It's a 15-member board, like you, governor-appointed, Senate confirmed. And I actually report to it, and it sets kind of overall direction, strategic direction, and policy for our agency. The agency itself, which I lead, has roughly 180, 190 staff. You know some of them, they're here in the room. And we do a whole bunch of things across the post-secondary education and training landscape. Now, this question of workforce development and sort of where WTDB and workforce lives within the HAC, we continue to wrestle with, if I'm frank. And I guess what I want to try to express to you is my view that one of the things that I hope we're able to accomplish through WTDB work, HAC work, the work of our agency in partnership with the legislature and the governor, and ultimately with the public, is to sort of dismantle the artificial division between higher education and workforce development. In fact, higher education is workforce development. If by higher education you mean colleges and universities, which is what most people think about in higher ed, and we include everything kind of education and training after high school in that definition, because we see this all, whether it's on-the-job training, paid work experience that's geared towards career, credential seeking students at community colleges or at private career schools, graduate school students at our colleges and universities, apprenticeship programs. These are all workforce development, and they're doing other things too, right? They're helping build strong communities. They're giving people kind of enriching their opportunities in life and in community in other ways. But it is really all workforce development, and we've sort of stretched the definition of higher education to say higher education is all those things too. Again, it's not in most people's minds. I think it's universities and colleges, but given that it's the name of our agency, and we do have responsibility for all of those activities, post-secondary education and training activities, we really categorize that all as higher ed, kind of broadly understood. All right, so what does it look like kind of functionally within our agency, and particularly these two boards that we support along with others, the HAC, our actual commission, and the WTDB. And I guess, as I indicated, the HAC is our ultimate kind of governing board for this staff and this group of employees, state employees, the HAC, who are responsible for administering our state budget, providing coordination of our higher education system, our colleges and universities, setting strategies. And I think that the HAC does really focus on that overall administration responsibility, that budget and policy setting responsibility, and pays particular attention to the coordination of our public and private institutions of higher education, our colleges and universities. So the WTDB, this board has a really important role to play, I believe, and a growing one that I think it has been growing into, to help bring the employer voice and the worker voice to and perspective lens to our broader budget and policy setting strategies as a state in the higher education and training landscape. And I think that whereas our commissioners, our HAC commissioners, they tend to be appointed backgrounds that involve some kind of experience in, or they may be working in higher education. We have faculty and students and et cetera. The WTDB, I think by statute, by law, has a very particular responsibility to understanding and bringing forward an employer perspective and a worker's perspective, and ensuring that that is informing state policymaking in this broad post-secondary education and training landscape. And I think one of the areas of opportunity that we have is to ensure that that voice is brought to the HAC, the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, when it comes to education policy, right? When it comes to higher education policy, including how we fund and support community colleges and public universities, and regulate and support career schools and other forms of post-secondary education and training. So I'm grateful that we've started the practice of hearing from a WTDB representative on a quarterly basis at HAC Commission meetings. I think, again, helping ensure that the commissioners to whom I report on the HAC understand what's happening at this board and what, in particular, employers, workers, their representatives here believe the state needs to be doing in order to meet employer and economic workforce needs. I really look forward to, as continue to learn from and engage this board, finding other ways of informing the HAC's broader policy and strategies efforts. I'm grateful to Anne for serving, Chair Mercero for serving on our core planning team that's working with our HAC commission to develop our next strategic plan for the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. So she's helping bring the perspective and voice of this board to that planning process. We've been in that planning process influenced by and impressed by the work that this board did, a year ago in the development of its most recent strategic plan. You are bound to see alignment between the two, not only because of Anne's participation on our planning team, but also because, frankly, we're using the same contractor, Karachi, and it has a fairly similar process, right? So I think the ultimate outcome will share some features not only in the kind of content and substance, but also in the sort of level of the way it looks and feels, kind of the level at which it sits. Let me turn to the Talent Summit, the talent assessment, some more recent and specific thoughts about partnership opportunities and kind of where we go from here. So I was quite struck by, not surprised by, but interested to see that the participants in this wildly successful Talent Summit, we had over 400 folks, great work by WTDB staff and staff from the Office of Workforce Investments, to put on this event. And as I think or hope in the survey of participants at the Talent Summit, the number one priority out of that long list that we allowed people to provide feedback on as potential priorities for the state when it comes to talent development. The number one priority was to promote greater engagement and collaboration between K-12, higher education, and other local workforce development providers and industry. And yes, here, says K-12. And I appreciate that Chair Mercer, I think on your behalf, brought that forward to the governor in a letter that she sent last month. It's a big statement, right? And I say in some ways not surprising, because I think there's a sort of something in there for everyone. You can bring a lot of different, it expresses or touches on, I think, a lot of different potential challenges, but I'll give you my sense of it, of what that need or what that demand that Talent Summit participants expressed reflects. One is, I think we are experiencing or have experienced over the last decade greater siloing of our systems in at least a couple of respects. And I'll only speak to the one probably that I feel most familiar with, and that is, and I will look to my colleague, some greater level of disconnect between K-12 and post-secondary education pathways. I think we're not doing or not attempting to do as much as we were a decade ago. And in spite of, I look at Janelle too, because she's been so involved over this entire time period and really trying to bring these systems more closer together. But I do think that we are not, and we have not been quite as attentive at the state level to ensuring those pathways from K-12 to higher ed and K-12 to the workforce as we were attempting a decade ago. And so I think, at least for some people answering that question, that was likely on their mind. It certainly is on my mind. And it's an effort that, along with the Department of Education and the great leadership there of Dr. Charlene Williams and folks like Janelle, and then our state superintendents, our local superintendents, I think we really owe Oregon students to make some real progress on it. Just as an aside, if you have not seen this series of articles that's been published by the Oregonian, Oregon Live, about college-going rates for high school graduates over the last 2 weeks, it's a really phenomenal. It's one of the best reporting series best pieces of reporting we've had in Oregon in a decade on the issue of K-12 to post-secondary transitions, including work, and just a lot of student voice in there and a lot of great stories. So we have real effort there, and I think it is a call for the summit Talent Summit respondents' kind of emphasis on the need for greater engagement and collaboration between these various sectors is, as much as anything, I interpreted it as a call for state and regional leadership, because it doesn't happen. A lot of good things do happen locally without us doing a thing, without the state. Local superintendents are talking to local employers and talking to community colleges and universities. But I think that the emphasis that the summit respondees placed on that reflects their desire, our desire, to see this happening on a holistic, comprehensive, statewide, and coordinated way, because you recognize that at a local level, at an institutional level, yeah, superintendent can have relationship with a few employers. You can have relationship with your local community college and university, but how are we creating systems and pathways and funding structures that ensure that students, learners, workers have opportunities across these, across these sectors, whether that takes them out of their local community or not. So I do think we have real need for additional greater levels of state and regional leadership there. One example of that, and I'll pull out one that's sort of near and dear to us at the HEC and to is through the legislature's relatively recent investment in new partnerships for workforce development. And I'm thinking of its investment in Future Ready Oregon, and particularly the workforce readiness grants that it established, and we're in the third round, opening up the third round of funding for. And this is not the be all end all. I want to be clear. We got to keep funding our community colleges and your universities, our K-12 systems, and create and local workforce development boards, and create pathways and connections and policies that between them. But Future Ready Oregon is really unique in a couple of ways that I think can model an increasing a path forward for increasing kind of state investment and excitement in workforce development. And one of the things that's exciting and unique about it is that it really starts, that investment starts, the workforce readiness grants, with the question of where is industry? And it singled out healthcare, manufacturing, technology. How is industry, through the industry consortia that it set up, identifying and assessing its own needs for workers? Right? What are industry leaders planning for in the years to come, and how are we allowing their view of their workforce needs to help drive state investment and state strategies in the years to come? And again, that's very different from looking at our colleges and universities, or K-12, or local workforce boards, and saying, here's funding to keep doing what you're doing, or you figure it out, right? It's the state saying, let's talk to industry in these key areas, starting healthcare, manufacturing, technology, and bring industry leaders together, along with leaders from education and training, from labor, and from community organizations, and ask them to identify the needs for workers over the next decade, and to help strategize about how to invest in order to get there. The second and the only other unique attribute that I'll name here associated with this model is that the funding then through the workforce readiness grants is meant to fund, and it's a competitive process, as you likely know, but it's meant to fund partnerships between colleges and community-based organizations and maybe the local workforce board, or some combination thereof, a training organization, an employer, a community-based organization that has ties to culturally specific groups within the community and can help pull and engage underrepresented populations in the workforce development system. So I think, again, it's a model that says, what's our objective? And it really asks industry to help define that, and then says, here's funding for some unique partnerships to reach those goals. And I think that's an exciting and potentially an informative model for how we do more workforce development and more higher ed in the future. Because again, I'm trying to use these interchangeably, and as a potential addition to continuing to fund colleges and universities and local workforce boards, et cetera. As we do, I think there's a really unique opportunity to organize more funding around this industry-centered model. The final, I think my final point or final topic will just be to take a step back and look at our current economy, look at our current workforce. We know more than I do about many of these issues, but really big picture, there are jobs. We know there are jobs, right? At this moment in the economy in Oregon, there are jobs. The question is, are they good jobs? Are they jobs that lead to career? Those jobs are also in some fields are available. But when it comes to who's getting the education and training opportunities that those good jobs, that those career-oriented jobs, that those resilient, sort of economy-resilient jobs are, we are providing inequitable access and on-ramps. Like that, to me, is the issue. Those good jobs, those career jobs, those living wage jobs, we need more of them. But those jobs typically require some form of post-secondary education and training, and we do not have equitable pathways to that education and training. The people who are obtaining the education and training after high school are disproportionately white, they're disproportionately affluent, they're disproportionately younger, and with advantages we're not reaching populations, and you could go down the list with enough support to get on those on-ramps. So to me, that's the big kind of picture challenge that this board, that the HEC collectively have to reach, and it's reflected in the board's strategic plan. With that, I did take up We
We
done?
still have time for
Oh,
questions.
okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. What questions do you have?
I make an observation, or it is a question.
Yes. Kathy.
Kathy Reynolds, Legacy Health, VP Talent Management. So this is like right in my wheelhouse, passion. I think that the question slash observation is around data. In that we know, sometimes we know qualitatively, sometimes we know quantitatively where the challenges are, to your point about equitable pathways. But I am concerned that we do not have structured, aggregated insights, because my second part of my job title is people insights. We do not have insights into the who, the where, the whys, the hows. And absent that, we can put all the money in the world out there, but we won't know that it's making a difference until it's too late. Everything we would be doing is lagging indicator and not leading indicator. And I was saddened, disappointed that on the upvotes at the summit, data came in lower. And I don't believe that was any negative intent on folks' part. I really believe they voted the right things in there. But data is intimately critical in order to advance that work. And so it's almost like it shouldn't have had a vote. It should have been a no-brainer that we absolutely need to have organization and structure around data. Because otherwise I worry that the question I have is, how worried are you about measuring progress towards equitable pathways and making sure that our state's money is actually being spent on the things in a manner that's actually achieving the outcomes we want to have?
Yeah, I think if some of the attendees had heard your spiel, they would have voted it higher probably. I think that was good. And actually but I think you've made a distinction, at least at the outset, between the type of data that actually I think we have and what we don't. So whether you see it or not, data has a lot of really good data.
We have data.
When I think of what Director Gerstenfeld's department collects from employers, wage data, occupation, industry data that we take great advantage of, things that is a great team, and then what we collect at the colleges and universities and training programs, local workforce boards, et cetera, what K-12 has, and then our efforts over the last 3-4 years to really knit that together into a longitudinal system, we can say a lot about the impacts, that the outcomes associated with learners based on or related to demographics and what types of institutions they attended, et cetera. What I think we don't, and I thought I heard you sort of allude to that, what I don't think we have really any strong understanding is sort of where learner, worker, Oregonian sort of motivation, like how their decision making is impacted by different kinds of incentives. We don't have, think of the sort of for-profit world and like marketing research and the way that we are all understood by big data gathering companies to be creatures that respond to certain kinds of incentives and not others, and have certain kind of interests and ambitions and not others. We do not have that. So when it comes to defining and describing like potential interventions, whether that's investments or policy nudges, et cetera, we're sorely lacking in any of the type of understanding that a sophisticated sort of firm would be. So maybe we're saying similar things. Maybe that I do think you would be perhaps amazed at what we can say about, and we're getting better at saying about Oregonians, like learning outcomes and workforce outcomes.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that it's an and to yours, because I think that level of insight, like who's the end user of our system and what do they need and how do we know that about them? I think the other part is I love the data we've got. And I get a lot of the emails. I'm in there slicing and dicing myself. I think the piece that I'm looking for is, where are people falling out of the process? Who's falling out and why are they falling out? Like if I think of a candidate coming through my system, I can see who I hired and I can see who applied, but I can't see why they didn't succeed. And so as we're putting money into different ventures, we need to really understand what would we see differently at the end of this so that we can measure that we're actually putting the money in the right place. And we need those insights up front to know to even start there.
Yeah, and I would say we have had some instances where we've talked about things in the room about outcomes. We're trying to be really outcomes oriented. And there's been some conversations about, well, I don't have access to that data. That's another group. So we're trying to really kind of push that forward, like, well, can you give that group access to that? And so, your help with that, and we'll raise those up to you as well. To, like, are those just old rules about how we engage, and are they holding back people? They were intended for a good reason, but are they really holding people back because it's the old ways of working versus, we got to move past that and figure this out.
Yeah, for sure.
What other questions do you have? I think we had one online. Is that right? Charlie?
Charlie, yeah.
Charlie, you're on.
Okay, great. Thanks. Ben, thank you for your comments, by the way, and appreciate your participation also in the summit. I guess the one thing that there was a common theme that I actually kind of caught in various conversations, and it really dealt with the whole process of grant funding. And what I wanted to do is to just get maybe your perspective a little bit in regard to, we've tended to develop the system of grant funding, but then there's the process that says, if you have a good idea, how do you make sure that that continues into the future? What's the sustainability behind that? From a policy standpoint, I wonder, how do we influence that as we step forward? Because I see many good programs that need the process of longer term development and have in a sense proven themselves, let's say through a first, maybe even a second round grant funding. Because I think there's a growing frustration out there that people are saying, I'm getting tired because I have no idea if my program will continue or not. I don't know if I want to put in the effort. So
That's a good question.
Yeah, for sure. And this is a dilemma and dynamic that, again, I feel like I've been dealing with a long time, going back to the efforts to do quite a bit in the K-12 space with strategic funding and on a grants basis and without that sort of guarantee of permanence. And I don't think there's an easy answer, Charlie. I think it's a real risk. The hope has been, the theory has been, I'll look at our legislative member here. The theory has been that by kicking off these efforts through grant making, you would give organizations, the recipients, the opportunity to prove that the model really works. And if it does, you would be in a position to secure longer term and permanent support. I think it's that latter piece that we've often struggled to manage. We will get some really good work going as a result of legislative investments, grant making program. We fail to sustain it, whether it's just not successful case back to the legislature, where the legislature has determined it has now new priorities, right? It tends to like doing new things. Right? Like folks like to have a new idea funded rather than simply be re-upping for the old idea. And so I'm not giving you a great answer to the question. I guess the one thing, and this would potentially get me in some trouble, but I do think that we ought to be willing to consider, when we have had a successful, call it a pilot or a successful initiative that was grant funded, we ought to be willing to look at our core funding streams, whether that's in community colleges or in K-12 or workforce development, and say, well, now is it time for us to pivot some of that funding into the model that was so successful through the grant funded initiative. But if it comes at the expense, the challenge, of course, is it comes at the expense of anybody who's been used to getting their dollars under those core, enrollment based or whatever based funding models. Exactly. It's tough.
All right.
You've seen with the Nurse Intern Act, the surgical tech apprenticeship, some moves towards innovation around higher ed and workforce, specifically healthcare. And I'm wondering if there's thought about space or what that space is to think about what those future projects might look like.
Yeah, it's such a great question. And it is happening across other sectors and industries. So the commission, the Higher Education Coordinating Commission yesterday approved 10 new community college programs, almost all of which are less than 1 year long certificates that are directly responsive to local workforce needs, have often been created or designed in partnership with employers. And so that there is innovation occurring within higher education institutions and without, in those cases, typically any sort of direction or even convening by the state. I think that, entities like this and conversations like this, and we've got, community college presidents on the line and other education leaders, I think sitting, having them or through the industry consortia, sitting alongside industry, hearing the need, and then with, in some cases, state support, getting, the opportunity to design and innovate for worker needs and employer needs is really important. But there's some really good things happening, and named a couple of them. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you for your leadership, and thank you for your support of the WTDB. And with that, we will move into our next agenda item. And I do want to sort of emphasize how glad we
I'm
have
so
you here.
sorry, Anne. May I just make one quick comment? I had my hand up. I'm
Yes,
sorry.
as long as it's quick.
It'll be quick. I just, I apologize for being late, and I just need to say out loud, the federal investment in our workforce development system has been decreased by 50% in the last dozen years, and the state is not keeping up with inflation. So please don't starve the system as well. I think it needs to be both and not pull from one and give to the other.
Thank you. All right. And with that, Representative, we're glad you're here. As you can see, a lot of connection between our work and your involvement will be really critical. And with that, we will thank you, Ben, and we will bring in our next speakers. Welcome, Dave and Helen Edwards. Please come in and make yourselves comfortable. And I had the pleasure of meeting Dave and Helen earlier today, and I think you will find their presentation really interesting. And I'll just remind you that keeping with our commitment to bring speakers in on current topics of interest, that's why they're here. It's related to economy, education, workforce, and more. They are a husband and wife team of technology executives and AI pioneers who founded Artificiality. Did I say that correctly? It occurred to me that I should have asked you that this morning. Their expertise blends insights from fields as diverse as cognitive science, complexity theory, philosophy, design, which they've applied in the AI space. And we spent some time talking about this since 2012. We tend to think of this work, I think, as brand new, but it's actually been around for quite a while, and they've been in the market. They've had several companies that they've started that have been bought in there because of how incredible their work is. And we are here to benefit from your knowledge. So please, impart, your messages to us today. And I know we'll want to have a little time at the end to ask you some questions. And we have a lot of folks online too, who will probably want to ask you questions as well.
Okay, great. Thanks for having us. We're excited to be here and to see those of you who have seen before. Sort of start to forget some faces after so many years being locked away and spend. So we're excited to be here. We're going to run through a presentation. We're going to go through it relatively quickly. To be able to get to some time to actually have some conversation. I'm going to stand here, so I'm sorry for this on the camera, but it's a little hard to do both, but I'd rather be looking at you in person, but we'll take the questions. So you can click ahead. Usually have the clicker so I can go quickly, but quickly what we do here is we focus on what we call the intimacy economy. The intimacy economy is what happens, is basically where we're going after the attention economy. Been in this world of social media where we're paying attention to things, we pay with our attention to things. That attention gets monetized. We're now moving to a world with AI where these AI is starting to get an intimate understanding of who we are. And the question we have is, what's that going to be like? What's it like when a machine actually really understands you very deeply? How will those companies use that deep understanding of us? Those are sort of the big questions. We study it from a scientific angle, from a design and product angle, and from a philosophical angle. We do think it's important to rethink what it means to be real, what it means to be human in this AI age. We have a publication that you can find at artificiality.world. We are also launching our first event in October in Bend, which will be an Imagining Summit where we focus on hopeful future of AI. So that's very exciting. We're just getting that launched now, and we work with corporates on strategy and research. We do deep research on that's industry specific, et cetera. So click ahead. Opening question we always ask people to consider: what is your excitement to fear ratio about AI? And we would normally take some time to delve through this, but we won't right now to ask each of you your answers, but just to think about it, because usually AI has, people have a bit of both. It's an incredible technology, it can be exciting, and then you worry about what it's going to be like, whether you're behind, whether the world's going to end. I mean, some of the real negative scenarios are really negative. And thinking about that ratio, and as we go through this, that ratio might shift around a little bit. And so just sort of be participant in that. Next slide. So generative AI is what we're going to talk about. You can flip right ahead. We'll talk about generative AI, we'll talk about values and a couple of other things. So the world of AI has fundamentally changed in the last year and a half. That's why we all think it's brand new. AI has been around a long time, right? It's a field, academic field that started in the 50s. But most of AI until a couple of years was focused on finding a bullseye. What's the prediction for this? What's sales going to be next quarter? What's the recommendation of what you should watch next? It's trying to find one thing. Generative AI is fundamentally different. It's an explosion. That's why everything is always crazy, but different. There's a lot of variation in it. Both of these things, systems are now coming together, and we're going to have applications that use them both at the same time. But it's good to understand that one principal difference and why this world of AI is different from what you've been using in all of your organizations for likely many years. Next slide. That means that when you, the premise and the promise of generative AI is that we take these big models that it can spend tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to train. They absorb every bit of information they can. They assemble into this huge data cosmos. That means you have access to an extraordinary amount of knowledge, and you have an AI that can weave its way through this thing and these crazy vectors to find answers and assemble things. And that means that when you actually pull it all together and you get an answer, it is a novel, unique, actually pull it all together, you get an answer, not something that is anyone else will get. It's an important thing to remember. When you get an answer, it's different from what somebody else will. Next slide. And that means that when you do look at it, one other key question is that the principle is that they are guessing machines. So that means that every time you get an answer, it is an assembly of guesses. You look at ChatGPT, sending a query up, sometimes a long conversation, you're getting an answer back. It's guessing at what the next best word might be. It's not just doing that, it's actually not quite the best word. Because if it was the best word, guess what? It would sound robotic. So they actually, to make it be more human-like, they turn the temperature, literally that's what it's called, to a 0.8, which means it's almost the best word, next best word, which is why you get this weird variation of things. But that's every time we've given this talk all the time. Every time we do it, slightly different. That's what makes us human. Next slide. And that means that when you look at these things, these are two screenshots that I took from ChatGPT asking the exact same question. I asked it, write me a blog post about how ChatGPT works. And even from where you are, you can tell that the answers are completely different, right? Two queries, write one after the other. That's what you have as an individual. That's also what you mean is you have a team. With 5 people on your team, and everybody's going and asking their LLM for answers. They're all going to walk into the room with a different answer, right? How do you think about that when you're trying to figure out how to manage a group? You've suddenly had a team of 5 people, but you now have 5 people and 5 more machine employees, we call them, right? And we don't mean to over anthropomorphize, but we do think of these tools as machine employees that you have to measure and govern, keep track of. Next slide, please. The other key thing to think of is that these are fabricators. They make stuff up. You know, you hear about hallucinations and all of that, but these things also will make things up if you ask them to, right? So next slide, you can see that it'll make up images, right? I'm not sure whether Ted Cruz and Nancy Pelosi have ever hugged, but that was not real. And I'm pretty sure Elon Musk and Taylor Swift have never had that. But these are easy to make. The separate conversation of what this is going to mean for the world as we move into the big election cycles this year, not just here in the US, but around the world. But this kind of misinformation is crazy. But there's also a part that, you know, we used to give these talks early on when ChatGPT came out. There was a training cycle that had ended. We published our first book after that, and we'd asked ChatGPT to write a review of our book. It was not in the training; it didn't exist. But still, it was a glowing review. Highly recommended it, by the way. So it's right because ChatGPT says so. But it will literally just make stuff up for you. It is also quite sycophantic. It wants to please you.
Yeah.
So the way you ask a question can get an answer back just because of the way you asked it. Next slide. This is some data that we like to show just to make sure people understand. If you've heard the term hallucination, hallucination basically means that it's giving you back something that's untruthful. Sometimes it can be broadly out of the world. Sometimes it's going and looking at a particular document and it's getting something inaccurate, even though it's comparing to a particular document. This is based on that latter process called RAG. It's the retrieval augmented generation is the technical term. What they did is they took a whole bunch of documents that are out of a corpus of stuff from CNN and news sources, and they measured how accurate these systems were at summarizing the documents. They're there, take this, summarize to here. The best model, this is only in January of this year, the best model had a 3% error rate, right? The up here, you're getting close to 10% error in terms of how often it got it wrong, where the summary did not match factually the document is trying to summarize from. This breaks all of our models of computing, right? For 40 years, we thought these machines acted like physical machines and they did what they were supposed to do. If they didn't, it was a bug, send it back to engineering, got it fixed, right? These things don't work that way. It will get better, but it'll never be perfect. Next slide. This is a little hard to see from here, but this is an assembly of screenshots that Helen took asking various LLMs what was the first date that the term artificial intelligence showed up in the New York Times. That's a fact. It should be discoverable. It's not hard. They all got a different answer. Next slide. So these things are not factual. They can also be really problematic. Two stories here. Heard about Air Canada? Air Canada used a generative AI tool to talk to customers. Customer came in and said, wanted to get information about bereavement refunds, right? So going for a bereavement trip and getting money back from the airline, got an answer, went back to therefore get the money back, and Air Canada said, nope, that doesn't comply with our policy. So that passenger took Air Canada to court and won. Interestingly, Air Canada defended itself, didn't just like hand over the however many few $100 it would have been. We're trying to actually create a precedent, I think, in Canadian law, but they lost. And so the law there in Canada at least says that if your chatbot says something, you're on the hook for it. This one over here is a screen from Microsoft Start, where it shows a web browser and then and a news story, and it tries to engage you with a question. And the story is there was a woman found dead in St. Andrew's School in Sydney, and she was a water polo coach. Sad story, obviously. But the question here was that the AI generated is, what do you think is the reason behind the woman's death? Murder, accident, suicide? And the comments here are just like, this is extraordinarily awful, right? And they got rid of this. But this is Microsoft, right? One of the smartest companies about AI, who, although has a very long history of putting AI out in the world and actually just, cutting themselves off. They do a terrible job of launching these things. But this shows you how hard it is to make sure that whatever it's saying is what you want it to say. Because that seems like it could be engaging, but an AI doesn't know that would actually feel awful to read. Right. Next slide. So a key thing to remember in terms of, we're not going to go into technology here today, but one thing to remember and to think of, it's important in terms of as we think about growing with these tools, is the whole world changed in 2023, not just because ChatGPT got launched, but because the underlying technologies underneath it. Prior to this, everybody had to do everything. You had to have people, the data, the algorithms, the compute, the whole thing. That's why only a small number of companies actually could really afford to do any of this really powerful stuff. Now you have this big red box down here that's called foundation models. That means that anybody in here with just signing up for an API access to GPT, which is the underlying model under ChatGPT, can make something off of it. And you just pay based on usage. And there's lots of these foundation models. Big companies, open source, they're all starting to fragment into different use cases. Some are big, some are small. But this fundamentally changes that this huge power that's available in generative AI is now available to everyone, not just the big companies anymore. That has dramatically changed all the offerings. Next slide. Key to this is the big companies, though, however, because it does cost a lot of money to build these, but also to run them. They're very expensive technologies to run. The inference cost, which is is the response that you get from the tools, is very expensive. And so it's important to remember what all these companies are about. So we like to go through each of these in terms of what their core purpose for being is. You start to see that reflected in their technology. Google's trying to organize the world's information. That's why they're doing their AI overviews, which we can have a separate conversation about why that's the problem. Apple's all about experience, which is why when you look at what they launched with this past week in terms of the new Apple Intelligence, they call it, that will be on our phones later this year. It's about your experience. The last one over here is one company that didn't used to be on this chart because it's still technically a startup, is OpenAI. And the reason we put them up here is because their purpose, their stated goal is to make artificial general intelligence, which they define as a technology that will be able to exceed human capabilities in the majority of economically viable work. Their goal is to make something that can put us all out of work. Pause for a second. Think about the fact that when you put that technology out there that costs lots of money, and it should be able to do our work better than us, how are you going to get paid? You're going to get paid by taking over labor. This is a classic, we call it it's capital capture. This is a capital to capture labor business is what they're building. Very impressed by their technology, very worried about their mission. I think that's a very important topic for this board in particular. Their job, in order for them to make their money back, there is people will lose jobs because of it. If we replace human labor.
Are we gonna?
Next slide. Another key thing we're in the middle of right now. For the first year or so, this whole world everybody was excited about this one tool down here, ChatGPT, and you probably heard the stories, fastest growing digital service ever to get to 100 million people. It's flatlined since, which is interesting, but that's only a very small number of people in the overall world. But now we have everybody with Microsoft, everybody with Google. I need to add in Apple as they bring stuff out. These technologies are now going to be in billions of people's hands. We've never seen this kind of a growth from brand new platform, like brand new experience with computing to mass adoption in this kind of timescale. Right. So beginning of the commercial internet, around then, there were 9 million of us online in 1995. That was it, 9 million people, and it grew, but it still wasn't very big by year 2000, right? So, but this is happening way faster. So, and this is a fundamentally different way of using the technology that now we all have to deal with. Next slide. One more thing here, important, cloud versus edge. This is particularly important with what Apple's announced. So right now, all of generative AI happens up in the cloud. Send your stuff to the servers, it comes back. This is changing. Apple and Google, especially driving us to put these models on our phones. That gives a totally different way in terms of what you can use, the latency involved, how much you control the privacy over your data. Big difference. Next slide. And there we go, values. Next, yeah. Next, all right, next slide. So we'd like to talk about this by asking you what your values are. Have a longer discussion, but please go ahead. Next slide. And the reason we bring this up is we think about what our values are, and think about what you want these technologies to do. Because these tools are trained on a lot of data, and we humans make that data bias. Up here, flowers and bees. If you ask an AI that's been trained on human experience, I'll tell you that flowers are more pleasant than bees because we think flowers smell nice and look nice, and bees sometimes sting us, right? So human experience, just being human is biased. But then there's all these other things about what we prefer, what we choose, how we act, where we travel, what food we eat, that generates bias in data. Next slide. Sometimes this bias is hidden. We don't really know it. Fascinating study from Stanford a couple of years ago was looking at the structure of the English language. Car is his, it's his car, a car is hers, it's her car. That one difference. His, hers, hers. Next slide. Makes an enormous difference in terms of what an AI will think is more associated with his or hers. The lines go to the left. If it's more associated with hers, goes to the right. If it's his, there's one thing, top corner, mom is the only thing that is more associated out of the 130 or 160 terms that often Robert Monroe, I believe his name was, put in there. So mom, but jewelry, girl, daughter, all kinds of things, all more associated with his. He's a linguistic prof, and his analysis was this is just structure of the English language. Next slide. So these things can be hidden. They become hard to get rid of. Next slide again, please. This is out of a Bloomberg study recently that looked at job titles. And they used generative image models to generate pictures of people associated with certain job titles. This is easy to see from the slide. Darker skin, lighter skin, architect, CEO, judge, social worker, fast food worker, dishwasher, janitor. It's fascinating because it's not just representing the stereotypes that we have, or the actual reality of racial makeup in different job titles. It's actually replicating stereotypes. So 2/3 of social workers and dishwasher, fast food workers in here were generated more darker skinned people. Whereas 2/3 of those job titles are held by people who are white in the United States. So it's actually not representing reality. Sometimes we're just reflecting the actual bias in the world. This is actually representing some sort of stereotype. Next slide. Same with perceived men and perceived women. These are generated images, so you're looking at perception, right, to be able to measure this. Same sort of thing, same high income jobs, darker is perceived male, lighter perceived women, lower income jobs down here, same sort of issue. Judges completely wrong, doctors completely wrong, right? It's amazing. Next slide. Changing this becomes a problem. This was an image of what the image result for CEO was in 2015. You just search Google Images. All men, mostly white. Only woman was CEO Barbie, the doll, actual doll. Woman and now they've gone in and they've actually manually changed it. So when you look for CEO image, there's aspirational images, a variety of things. Now, there's a good reasons why that is the way it was, based on the way the technology worked and who clicked on what, how many stories were written, right? It reflected the reality of the internet. They have to change it. Next slide. And here's some things that we pulled up recently. This is coffee. So a barista smiling or a barista making a complicated drink. Apparently, these generations of images think that if a barista is smiling, then it must be a young, assuming female, right? 20-something, right? Baristas making a complicated drink. Dudes, beards, tats. We actually usually joke to say, well, there's some nice young women smiling and there's some dudes who work in those coffee shops in Portland. Sorry. Yeah. Stereotype again, right? But that's what it comes up, right? And we stumbled across this. We were doing this work for a client. We stumbled across it and went, whoa, look at that. Didn't anticipate it. We're expecting it, right? That's part of the problem is these things are hidden. Next slide. All right.
Okay. Working with AI, yeah. Okay. You're getting. Right. So next slide, please. How do we think about working with AI? And a lot of what we think about is knowledge work and how these tools are going to change knowledge. And it's such a big focus at the moment on productivity, and it's like little p productivity. It's like saving a little bit of time here and there, rather than thinking about how to unlock big P productivity, more creativity and innovation and significant change. Next slide, please. and exploring that space of possibilities. So we go back to sort of the grandfather of how to think about some of this. Danny Kahneman said, an organization is a factory that manufactures judgments and decisions. And we hone in on that and say, where are the key decisions, judgments that have been made in these chains of tasks? Because chains of tasks are kind of hard to get your head around. Next slide. And in all of AI, one of the ways to think about it is a little bit like what happens to the value of cream and sugar when the price of coffee goes down. Price of coffee goes down, and what happens? We drink more coffee, so the value of cream and sugar goes up. And with AI, it's traditionally been a prediction solving problem. So prediction gets cheaper. What happens to the value of these other things that are around it? The cream and sugar of AI is action and judgment, because there's more actions made available in this broad space of innovative, creative opportunities, and more judgments that humans have to make, because we just get closer to the problem. It's kind of like a fractal. It just keeps, every time we get closer, it's just more problems, more opportunities. Next slide, please. So what do we know about work? Because this is a young thing. We just haven't had a lot of time. And you'll have access to these slides, obviously, but so there's a lot of granular detail in here. But what do we know so far? It does save time. Generative AI in writing tasks and many tasks saves time. Coding saves time. There's a lot of data in there. Thank you. And helps the least experience the most. There's a proficiency bump and a productivity bump in the novice. The problem is that is actually getting in between the expert and the novice. So it's changing the way we've got to think about how expertise and mastery grows. And this is very early. We're still studying this a lot. But what's happening in that we can tell now is in creative divergent tasks, that can be quite a positive thing. But in convergent complex tasks, that can be quite a negative thing, or we can see some human downgrading. Next slide, please. We'll show you the latest results on that. So what we know so far also is that we've got to balance this reliance and reliability. We're shifting what humans do to much more analysis and integration. Even what we should be doing, even with a basic tool like a simple ChatGPT interface, is being more aware of when we're in an editing mode. But the problem is that most people just copy and paste. That automation bias, that overconfidence bias, a lot of these human decision-making biases that are well documented, that can't even document any of them, confirmation bias, they're actually amplified and entrenched even further with these tools without good training, without good exposure to these tools, with really good coaching. And it can definitely help with creativity and critical thinking. We run experiments in our workshops, and it can be extremely creative. Problem is that a lot of those things aren't necessarily appropriate or useful, and that's what we need that expertise for. That's where we need this growth of human mastery, to be able to recognize things that don't make any sense. And the problem is we're getting a lot of stuff that just doesn't make any sense. You see it in the code bases, you see it in generative pollution on the internet, where it's very hard to get rid of these things that just don't make any sense. Next slide, please. So the core data is, these are the best studies that we have so far, and they generally sort of keep being reproduced, that with GPT versus without GPT, you see low performers get these big productivity bumps, high performers a little bit. Next slide, please. The problem comes, and we talked a little bit about this big creative product innovation step up. The problem happens when you get into more complex environments, you actually get quite a significant downgrading. So low performers do significantly worse, and even high performers, even experts, still get caught out by these tools. It's very hard to distinguish when they're not giving you the most accurate. And a lot of people aren't yet in that habit of having turn by turn, a long conversation that keeps going. They're often just in, like I say, that copy paste. Next slide, please. And the other thing I want to leave you to think about is this issue of creativity and what actually happens with what happens between the individual and the collective. The individual gets a really big bump. You feel really creative and get really got it. But even though these models will give different answers every time, there is a certain sameness to the way they're used if you're not an expert user. So the collective gets dumber. So we've got, collective intelligence over here and collective stupidity over here. And this is a really big issue. You can't just sort of throw it into the workplace and say, well, we're all going to be way more creative now with ChatGPT. It's actually going to be the complete opposite. So there's a lot of subtlety and nuance and how to handle this particular opportunity. And
Next slide, please. So the way we think about this is based on some research that came out of MIT and BCG that predates the generative AI world, but it still applies, which is that the requirement for getting returns out of AI is not in the technology and the platforms. That's required. This is a waterfall. These things are required. You have to do this. But the real gains come in actually working on the human and machine integration. So knowledge sharing and structuring interactions and roles. So thinking about how it works in a workflow, what people's jobs are, and how they actually work together. Next slide. Okay, one more. So we're going to leave you with 5 big ideas, just to give you some ideas. The first is the intimacy economy, as I referenced before. These tools are going to develop an intimate knowledge about us and an understanding. Learning the attention economy is our attention got used. We became the product, right? And that's how these systems were monetized. We don't yet know how this is going to work. Some companies will make things for us, others maybe not.
this counts in terms of the workplace as well.
Yes.
The good and bad of workplace surveillance.
Yes, the intimate knowledge of the employees, but also the knowledge of the companies. That's why everybody was so worried about letting people just put stuff up in the ChatGPT, right? Because it's going to get them to get to know things that you may not want it to know. Next slide. Another key concept that's just coming out is these tools being able to have agency. So this is where you can think about it, that they're not just perceiving the world or reasoning about it, but they can take action on our behalf. And this question of what it means for these tools to take action. What does it mean when your customers are no longer human, but your customers interface with your customers actually with an AI agent that is operating on their behalf? They're the ones that are placing the orders. They're the agents you're calling with the customer service query. What does that actually mean? Next slide. Third idea is that this change to CX to AX, right? So this is a big, large change that we will see. And it is kind of a moment where we have to stop and recognize what happens when for your marketing campaigns, if you're not marketing to humans as much, but you're marketing to their agents. How do you think about all of those interactions? Right? That's where we're headed because, next slide, one of the key things that's happening is that we're moving towards an agentic web. What I mean by this is that people are already making an extraordinary amount of content with these tools, and they're using agents to automate the content creation, put it up on the web, and be able to try and flood the internet with things that will drive content to their businesses, right? We're getting to a point where there is question about when there will be more machine-generated content on the internet than humans, and how we humans will actually figure out how to where anything is anymore. And if there's enough content created by machines, we will need machines ourselves to be able to navigate the internet. We won't be able to be humans to absorb it anymore. And for those of us who remember it long enough ago, remember the original search engine, that was dominant was Yahoo, and it was made by people. It's actually librarians that structured all the content of the web, right? Like, remember those days? Now we have a machine Google. Now we're going to need machines to read what the machines organized that the machines made. Yeah, which is very sci-fi. Next slide. Finally, we do have a hopeful vision or a dream, if we will. We like to talk about a mind for our minds. This is a riff on what Steve Jobs used to say. He said the computer was going to be the greatest invention ever because it would be a bicycle for our minds. History to that. Man on a bicycle, woman on a bicycle, especially this woman on a bicycle, really fast, really efficient.
That's why we live in Bend.
Yes, exactly. We live in Bend because of that. But for us, these tools are no longer tools like bicycles that you steer and brake and speed up. They don't you're not in control of them in the same way. They have metaphorical minds. We are wary of the anthropomorphism, but they are minds of themselves. But the question for us is how do we design those minds to make them for our minds? Right? Not us doing stuff on social media for the companies that are there. How do we make these things actually work for us? And I think there's a big question about whether that will happen or not, but that's our mission, is to try and figure it out. And so final slide is that's the real focus of our summit in October, the Imagining Summit, where we're working on imagining a hopeful future with AI. We embrace, as you can tell, all the negativity and all the worries, but we're going to try and table that and have what will be 42 hours in the mountains to try and imagine a hopeful future and think about what that might be. And we would love to have more participation from businesses and governments and everyone in Oregon. We have a fantastic group of lineup of speakers, or in our world, conversation catalysts, some real legends in the academia world, a couple of really interesting designers from key places. But this is a collaborative event where there will be a work product at the end that will be something we will publish. That's a collaborative vision of what a hopeful future might be. So thank you for your time, for your patience of us rushing through things to try and get the timeline. Anne warned us this morning that she cut us off.
You're not surprised. No, you did great. And we do have time for questions. We have about 10 minutes for questions. I have a question. I'm going to use my my chair role to go first. I asked you this morning, and I think the group would probably appreciate hearing from you on this question. I was sharing with him about our work on essential employability skills or workforce readiness skills. And my question was, as it relates to our advocating for, skills being taught in schools and different forums, how does what you just say either change that or add to the skill set that we would want our young people being taught in order to be prepared for this future and this year?
So I think that what you're asking about is a core part of what we're looking at literally right now. That's part of our next research project, is thinking about this bridge between education and corporate. And I would say that so far, both sides are looking at each other going, because nobody's really sure. There is, I think that the core way we think about it when we teach people about these tools, we don't walk in and say, here's some prompts, those kinds of terms, because this isn't the same kind of software. This isn't like, hey, put this on the same path as teaching somebody how to use Excel, or even something, advanced like, Databricks, something like that. Because the software does not work like that in the way it was. We had to learn what the tool was to figure out what to do with the mechanism to make the thing do the thing you're supposed to do. This is dealing with an intelligence. And that's more like teaching somebody how to manage people than it is how to use a tool. How do I handle this? How do I handle this intelligence in this community, this complex human system within which we operate? What does that mean? What is this good at? What do I take from it? What do I worry about it? It's a very different sort of mindset. We've never taught anybody how to do that stuff with something technical. So it's a mind shift from the beginning, from the strategy about how you think about this.
Thank you.
I have a couple of things to add to that. I think that one of the most important things is for people to recognize that that the number one thing that we're aiming for here is a collective intelligence and not collective stupidity. And the core of that collective intelligence comes from knowing how to get along with other people and how to access the knowledge in other people, knowing how to access the knowledge that's in machines, and knowing the difference between. And some of that we would call these days, critical thinking skills, understanding how to build up your skills over time and level of expertise with dealing with individuals and teams. Also coming to and building your own what we call machine intuition. So building how these things actually work, the basic mathematical construct that sits underneath. Conceptually difficult, but a lot of people get scared off by that. But I think understanding that they are fundamentally probabilistic systems, understanding the difference between how a human generates language, as far as we know, and how a machine generates language, and being able to, or the image generation, just the very conceptual foundations of how they work, in the same way that we have conceptual foundations in terms of theory of mind for how another person works, and being able to understand and how you build up that machine intuition is essentially practice. But practice on something that, the difference between the things you know how to do and the things you don't know how to do. you'll really see a fundamental shift in the way you conceive of the tools. If you're doing something that you're a domain expert in, where you can spot the mistakes really easily, versus if you're using it to explore. So we think about that as, sort of explore versus exploit, or explore versus perfect. That trade-off is important.
Thank you. Tony?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of questions, but this is a really fun little topic right after lunch, right? The company that you mentioned I'm trying to look at this a little bit through the workforce lens, whose mission it is to essentially eliminate the human factor in work, right? How do we know, or at the rate AI advances, how do we know that the rose-colored missions of all the other logos we saw up there aren't really going to get there at some point in spite of their stated mission? Because AI is growing at such a fast pace that we're going to struggle to keep up with an understanding of it. That's the slightly more dystopian side of my question. And then the other one would be, we often talk about as technology grows, the jobs don't necessarily go away. I mean, they do in a sense, but they're replaced by new jobs. So is AI going to have its own repair service AIs that will come out and fix the AIs so that there are no jobs for humans to interact with it?
Such a complex, there's a lot there. So first, the history's shown that there are, the jobs don't go away per se. There's plenty of jobs. And there's lots of reasons for that. And I know that the state economist who's linked in here is a fan of David Alter, as we are, and so all of that being said, there is a significant uncertainty around some key things with these technologies that we don't yet understand. We don't yet understand what some of those new jobs are that emerge particularly. There's conflicting views out of Silicon Valley, because a lot of it is quite ideologically driven. That almost there's an ideology of humans don't need to work, that's boring, so let's get rid of it so that we all go to the beach.
Have more fun.
Yeah, have fun. But if you actually
And make
go,
the same amount of money every month.
yeah,
Everyone.
I mean, whatever. I don't have time to go down that rabbit hole. But
Go on.
if you look at the actual empirical data on this, as AI enters a workflow, most of the time, what it does is increase that ability for humans to act and the ability for them to make judgments. And you even just look at some of these small microcosms we've pulled up. There are, if you're a data scientist now, you should be spending a lot of time looking at the judgments that are made on the cohorts in your data and how people of color are treated, or how women are treated versus men, and all of those kinds of things. Those are new activities that didn't exist before. Personally, like, people ask me what keeps me optimistic and where do I think the ideal use case is for a lot of this. I think it's in scientific discovery and in innovation, because innovation is now computationally tractable. We can see patterns in innovation that we were never able to see. We can use these tools to explore the combinatorial space of new materials, for example, or new innovations. And what we can do with those is then put the human causal mind on that. What's the cause of that? What's the effect of that? What's the theory sitting that could be there? What's the hypothesis I want to test? No AI can do that yet. Now, if AGI, the definition of AGI includes being able to be truly creative, transformationally creative, to have an imagination, to be able to posit a hypothesis that no human could ever do, then we're in they're definitely going to be cognitive partners, but they work differently to us. High dimensional extrapolation in spaces that humans just can't do. The question is, what do we do? Now, what we do is still, is basically what's meaningful to other humans. What's a true innovation? What's true novelty? What's a true creation? That gets decided by other humans, not by AI per se. So at that sort of really high level, I think that's the thing that keeps me optimistic about this, and that there'll still be plenty of jobs. What are they? I think the place my mind goes is to scientific discovery and innovation. His mind goes somewhere else because he's a history major.
Just quickly about quickly your answer about the other companies. So the reason I give a hard time to OpenAI is because that is their stated goal. And if you do some math and you figure out what it would take for people to get returns, you know, Microsoft's talked about $100 billion data center, right? In order to get their returns that they need off of the way their financials work, you could get rid of 2 million jobs and that would give them return. So I just kind of did that back of the envelope math. I'm not saying that's what their plan is, but when you look at Sam Altman and he says he wants to raise $7 trillion or something to do AGI, that would require replacing every job. So there's something about that math that's kind of funky, but also all the other major tech companies have businesses that would fall apart if we destroy the economy. As a startup, they get to pick up the pieces at the end. But we hold them out there because it is their stated goal. And I think that's important to recognize when you're working with companies, what their true goal is and make sure it aligns with yours.
Okay, so we are on top of a break, but I'm going to take 5 minutes from the break. So we have 5 minutes for 3 more questions. So ask your question quickly and
we'll be quick.
Yep.
Yeah, trust.
So Sherry, you're next, then Matt, then Venkat.
I partly feel like I should do like in the Senate and say I cede my time to Venkat, I feel like, but the only thing I want to add to there's 2 things. One is I have been an early adapter of this process and working with AI. And, you know, my feeling is that there is still a lot of work we can do with the workforce to partner. It hallucinates too much for me. I gotta see where I do not feel that it works very well outside of what I know I give it in a very controlled environment, because too much slides into it. And consequently, I'm not 100% sure on its own, left to its own devices, it's not going to go someplace that is actually not real or useful for us. So I personally feel that is something that we can teach people to work alongside. You know, while we were on the thing, I just threw in some sticky notes into ChatGPT, like, can you read this for me and decipher it? That's what it can do. That's not like exciting, you know, like, but it couldn't write my book. It couldn't give me a decent citation. It couldn't do any of those things. So I think we shouldn't get too fearful and remember that we can harness it and work alongside it as a thought partner. And that's the way I think about it. So anyway, that's really a comment more.
Thank you. From mine. Beth?
You showed 2 charts. People use AI and their individual productivity goes up, but collective productivity goes down. And I know you touched on this a little bit when you were talking about collective intelligence. Can you just quickly explain why that happens and what organizations can do to prevent that in the future and get collective productivity up?
Use a couple of different models.
Yeah.
That's a simple one. Get people to become more skilled at pushing the model in lots of different directions. So rather than, because I think what happens is that we've run these workshops and people all sit around and it's almost a natural attractive basin, right? People start asking the same kind of questions. So you've constantly pushing the boundaries and keep pushing people out. So it's like a sort of group think on steroids. So that's the other way. So it's just more of a diversity of thought. And I think that getting people to be a little bit less confident in how they need to feel what it's like to make a mistake. Need to feel what it's like to take in a safe environment. What was it like that I stood up and put something on a slide that was actually an error? And you go, ooh, so that the next time you're just more skeptical.
Thank you.
I think the main thing.
Okay, thank you. Venkat, bring us home quickly.
Very quickly, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so Sherry asked me to ask a question, so I'm just going to change it to 2 quick comments. So first of all, I don't think that the advance to AGI as defined by OpenAI and others will put people out of work. I think people who don't know how to work with AI will get displaced. So it's critically important for us as a board to train people to work effectively with the latest AI tools for all professions and disciplines and emphasize those human skills that we keep talking about, like critical thinking and reasoning. And my second comment is to do with hallucinations, and models should produce relevant results in reference to facts that we know, but the facts change. And so training a model to memorize all the facts is actually the wrong way to do it, because it will need to be constantly trained. And so I think it's important to have models that are able to reference databases that include dynamic facts. But anyway, I yield my time. Thank you.
I totally agree with you, Ben. And I just want to say, we spent a lot of time in the last month looking at generative search and really asking ourselves, does this use case make sense? And what it did was really make us have to pass all the different kinds of search. And it became really clear that there are some search states that you want zero hallucinations for. So this is a bad use case. But there's also this extraordinary expanse of search opportunities where it doesn't matter if there's a little bit of flex, just doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And there's many reasons why it doesn't matter. It's actually you gain more by having generative search capabilities than you lose in having the odd thing that isn't there.
Yeah, I would say both to Venkat and to Sherry that one of the ways that we teach people how to use these tools when we do is to help think, is to put that in a context and say, these will make some errors. So what can you ask this where that sort of error rate doesn't matter? Give me 5 ideas for a way to do this. Are they all correct? Doesn't really matter. If there's 3 of them that I hadn't thought of, that's a gold mine, right? There's lots of ways to use these tools in which case the errors that might happen in the system, the creativity of it is the point of it. But people frequently use it the wrong way. They think it's a database of facts. That's just not how these things are created. It's not a great use case for them. It can be in certain cases, and we do work with some of the enterprises to do a lot of the stuff inside where they're doing that as retrieval, and that can be really solid. But there's a lot of ways to use these tools very productive, where the natural part of their creativity and that sort of hallucination is actually more an advantage than a disadvantage.
And you think about how we think, if you had to say one mechanism that we think, we're analogical reasoners, and using these tools to help you be a superpowered analogical reasoner, they're really, really good. Yeah. You can get totally different conceptions of the world concept faster. You have a good.
That's awesome. You guys what was really a dynamic presentation. Obviously, we went past our time and I didn't do that. So thank you so much for being us here today and helping to continue our understanding of AI and how we might think about it in our roles on the workforce board. Todd, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, real quick. Thank you so much. It's great to see you in person again. It's been a bit. Loved your presentation. And if you could send us some more details on the summit in October, and we'll make sure we get those out to everybody on the board and other partners as well. And then I'd love to get info from you in terms of training that either you do or are aware of for, potentially agency staff and other people in the, agency enterprise and any of the board members and their partners to engage with. So yeah,
Happy to
do those.
Right. Thank you. And with that, we're going to take a break until 2:35.
that have effectively avoided tax.
Yeah.
Corporations and individuals that run the companies are the world's greatest tax evaders. So sorry if I'm still on the.
Yeah, no,
But tell you,
that's well-known fact.
I know, but like, you deal with some of those people in their previous lives. Oh, I mean, they do a really good job.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons that we call that open end. I'd like to skew it so much. Tim Altman's out there saying, don't worry about it. You're all, no one's doing the job anymore because you're all going to support this for basic income.
Okay.
It's going to say, okay, Sam, let's hear your tax return. Yeah. How much?
Challenge with getting it from all the advice. To do something, you want to see what the benefits.
I was like, are you?
I give my, do what I say.
Where's the word? Then I'd go, okay, I'm maybe. At least there's one really rich guy said, I'm gonna give.
But it's Elon Musk who just got 59 billion already.
But I was saying, if it were.
So I always kind of
Higher
about that.
both said. Yeah, I'm involved in advocating these technologies, it's interested in tax. None of them are actually doing anything. It's like, name one, I mean, I'm gonna actually pause for a second, I have to think about it. Name one great philanthropist that is running any of these.
I'm just.
I personally know some of the old Apple crew because I used to work there. The current execs were at the crew when I was there 20 years. They're a little bit different because none of them actually declare anything. That was a precedent.
No, you don't accept.
Way money, but don't talk about it. It's the care thing, but he wanted the celebrity to be the company, the brand, not the individual. But still, none of them are stand out as people that are.
Obviously, something more relevant would facilitate all of such a moss, you know, that's.
Eventually.
They're not.
As you do that, and if you're so low, I was like.
That's like, you have to figure that out. That's, people look at us like.
That's why I thought what you said about, you know, we're gonna need an AI to be able to engage with information. Purchase things. All of that. I'm like, well, wait a minute, I don't have a job. How does that AI get the money to buy the stuff, right, to purchase for me?
Yeah. When you don't have a job and getting supported by income that's coming from millionaires and their tax returns, like what's.
That's awesome.
Because they've taken a lot to their bunkers that they've.
Did you ever see that Netflix, it's been a while, the social dilemma about phones?
Yep.
So what is this whole Apple Intelligence gonna do with all the algorithms? You know, Facebook, that's kind of obsolete almost now, but Instagram and TikTok and all that. In terms of what's gonna do.
One of the slides I'm not showing is I've kind of had to rough it up this week for our monthly research thing. The Apple world has two different worlds. There's a your world center. That's where Apple Intelligence lives. Your contacts, your mail, your messages, your all the stuff that you were putting on your phone. It's not touching anything in the outside world.
Yeah.
But it's going to hunt you out to
Like you were talking, the privacy thing, yeah.
Yeah, that wall is the thing that gives me what Apple's actually doing. I'm not just a blind.
Yeah.
I have written, I still bleed 6 colors. I'm like old school Apple, right? But that's a long time.
There's some ethics in
Yeah,
there.
but there is something about that boundary that I think if they set a precedence, that helps.
And that's a hard conversation because.
Thanks. I mean, like,
Sorry to go down.
maybe we can have here.
It's down.
It's been a couple of days.
But you actually have great inspiring ideas too. So
Yeah, yeah.
Very quickly,
Thank
what's
you
the
so
outcome
much.
of the summit? What do you hope to get at the end of the 44 hours? But for the people who come, what do they get out?
They get to be participants and co-authors of this report. So something that we're going to have a variety of things that people get to contribute. Is that right?
Limited.
Contributions together.
Okay.
Here we go. Right.
It's being.
You're all about optimism. I didn't.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Okay, next up, we are going to talk about the talent assessment. We have Annie Wyhoff with us today. Welcome, Annie, or welcome back, I should say. It's with SRI who's presenting this information. And then when she's done, I'm going to be looking for motions. Hopefully we have quorum to approve the 2024 Oregon Talent Assessment
So after a second, obviously, we'll have discussion and then we'll take the vote. So, Annie, you have about, like, or so, because there'll likely be questions. So if you can, get us to about 3:05, that would be great. And then that'll allow us time for questions and then the vote.
That sounds great. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Annie Wyhoff, and I am a senior data scientist at SRI Center for Innovation, Strategy, and Policy. And I'm so glad to be joining you all today. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm so glad to be joining you all today to present the talent assessment. I'm going to the next slide. The talent assessment is a really crucial tool for both the WTDB and the HEC for driving positive change related to economic growth in Oregon. And so I think the findings and recommendations that we can share with you will help create equitable prosperity for Oregonians and ensure that the businesses and communities in Oregon have the talent that they need to thrive. So this assessment will shape the state's priorities. Moving forward, and we're very excited to have collaborated with so many of you to make this a well-informed and action-oriented document. Okay. To start with, we worked with the HEC, the WTDB, and the steering committee to define the focus of the 2024 assessment. The priority was to focus on both industry clusters that offer workers strong career pathways for growth and necessary occupations. So those industries that we focused on are health sciences, IT and analytical instruments, which include semiconductor manufacturing, construction, and wood products manufacturing. And the necessary occupations are childcare and heavy and tractor-trailer truck drivers. In addition to an overall labor market analysis, the assessment incorporates the perspective of Oregon businesses and key workforce and education partners, a deep skills analysis for each of those occupations and industries, discussion of the implications on DEI and the impact of technology like AI, and it concludes with targeted recommendations. Next slide. So SRI's assessment of the talent ecosystem for this report is based on 4 primary data sources. We did a survey of members of the business community where we got 201 responses. We did partner engagement through one-on-one interviews and focus group where we talked to 64 partners. Some of you are in the room. And we did an analysis of economic data from the source Lightcast, and we directly analyzed over 200,000 job postings obtained from the National Labor Exchange's Research Hub database. Next slide. So we'll begin by providing an overview of how Oregon's labor market has changed after COVID. Next slide. Overall, as we can sort of see on the chart, the state has generally had a pretty strong post-COVID recovery. Some of the positives here include that most people who want a job have a job. And we also seen that latent workforce coming off the sidelines and coming back into the workforce. And there's also strong projected job growth. They're expected to have 10% growth over the next 10 years, which leads us to sort of the next slide, which has the same negatives about that. And so even though we have this really strong job growth, there are some structural issues in the demography of Oregon that are projected to impact the labor market. And so even though the economy is growing and those jobs are expected to increase 10% over the next decade, the state experienced the first instance of population decline in over 30 years in 2022. And this decline is continuing. And so there might not be enough workers to meet that growth. That decline is fueled by a low birth rate, the aging workforce, and a shift from being an in-migration state to an out-migration state. So that's a challenge that we really grapple with in those recommendations. Next slide. So next I'll share our findings on the labor shortages in the state. And we're really concerned with the increasing economic growth in those challenging dynamics. So this chart demonstrates net labor shortage or surplus across all state industries beginning just before COVID through March 2024. Overall, the state's recovering and the relatively moderate labor shortage is improving, albeit kind of slowly. Oregon is performing better than the US overall, but a reversal in the demographic trends and a wave of impending retirements is kind of a warning sign that it's really critical to address these shortages and to strengthen that overall talent pool. Next slide. So this chart goes through those where we're seeing those shortages by share of the occupational workforce. Childcare has the largest labor shortage, but by sheer numbers, health sciences has the largest shortage. All the industries and occupation groupings except health science have a shortage of about 3,000 workers, where health sciences shortage is almost 27,000 workers. Next slide. So next, I'd like to move on to sharing our findings from each individual industry and occupation that we studied for the assessment, starting with health sciences. Overall, there was a strong wage and employment growth in this cluster, which follows those national post-pandemic trends. The registered nurses were the position with the most job postings, and they were also among the fields with the largest labor shortages. So that's nurses and mental health workers. And we also noted that managerial positions were pretty sparse. So we identified several barriers to expanding the labor pool and addressing the health sciences shortage. So over 70% of health sciences employers noted competition from other employers as a key challenge contributing to the labor shortage, which indicates there are not enough workers to go around. And we also heard that the licensure process is a barrier, that it could take a very long time to onboard, particularly getting into the health insurance system. Okay, now we can go to the chart. So health sciences tends to offer fewer pathways for career advancement than other industries, but the nursing pathway that we studied in the assessment is a very strong opportunity for career mobility. We examined the nursing pathway from CNA to registered nurse to nurse practitioner. And here in this chart, we are highlighting the skill requirements between CNA and RN. The gap between these skills acquired at the CNA level and those needed for RN jobs are often very different, which makes obtaining the needed skills to advance in the pathway particularly difficult. And what this means is that it's really putting strain on the educational programs, training RNs to make sure that their nurses have the skills that they need to succeed in that next level job. And we also heard that the lack of lab research and learning space for healthcare contributes to this gap of skills and workers and presents challenges for training individuals for those modern healthcare technologies. Next slide. So the IT portion of our cluster focuses on the software systems that are used to manage and process information and also on hardware such as networking devices. And the analytical instruments portion of the other half of this cluster is primarily semiconductor manufacturing. And so the two positions in this cluster with the most job postings would be semiconductor processing technicians for the analytical instruments half and software developers for the IT half. IT and analytical instruments employers have the most positive outlook on the Oregon labor market in our survey, and more workforce resources than any other grouping, while a greater share of IT and analytical instrument employers reported no labor shortage compared to employers in other industries. A greater share of them also indicated that the workforce programs are not well aligned to industry needs. And this sentiment seems to be particularly important for semiconductor occupations. Next slide. So what this chart is doing is it's comparing the overall programming languages required for jobs in semiconductor manufacturing versus jobs in other IT roles. And when we look at this, the distribution of the skills actually is quite closely aligned, which indicates that there's opportunities for career progression and transferability between these two sort of halves of the cluster. Specifically, we show that semiconductor manufacturing jobs require specialized knowledge and skills that are more closely related to the IT industry than traditional advanced manufacturing. And I think the biggest finding here is that semiconductor manufacturing jobs require programming at all. 71.4% of IT jobs require programming skill, but 61.2% of semiconductor jobs do. And they both require roughly the same top 10 languages in slightly different orders, which is why we really think of these as sort of distinct from other advanced manufacturing fields. And we can see that between these two groups, they're sort of the same core computer skills, but we have cloud languages of Terraform and Azure, scripting languages like Python, core coding languages like C, Java, and Go, and SQL being a data language. Next slide. So for construction, the industry cluster is made up of 16 different industries. It's quite broad of housing, industrial building construction, highway, street, bridge construction. We have machinery manufacturing and others. But despite, sometimes having economic downturns, Overall, the construction industry has a consistent pattern of growth over the years, which is driven by the reason to build more things, population growth, increasing urbanization, and infrastructure development, and particularly due to the governor's push to increase the construction of new housing to meet the housing shortages. Okay. Next slide. So this is, I think, one of the most interesting charts that came out of our skills analysis. And what we're looking at here is that amongst the different target industry clusters, the construction job postings actually mentioned business skills the most and demonstrated almost as much of an emphasis on those business skills as on the technical skills, which is quite different than the other industries that we study. The presence of these business skills is notably tailored to sort of on-site workplace environments, skills like scheduling and superintending, over more abstract business competencies we saw in other fields like leadership. And these business skills for construction are very practical and directly applicable to construction work. And what we found when analyzing this industry is that construction is made up of things that are relatively easy to enter at a low skill level, but that it offers a mix of technical and managerial skills as you progress the field. And the implication of this is that those skills that you acquire early in your construction job career forms a foundation that you can add business and managerial skills to, offering a pathway up to those higher value opportunities we know exist. And really, I think the takeaway from this chart is that managers do need some technical skills still, but nearly all technical occupations require some business skills. Next slide. So for wood products manufacturing, this cluster had one of the strongest competitive advantage over all the other industries we examined in the US. The employment concentration here is 3 times higher than the national level. There's a mixed economic outlook in wood products between 2018 and 2023. Although average wages increased by about $17,000, there were a loss of 1,000 jobs. And wood products manufacturing in particular has evolved really significantly with advances in technology. But the stakeholders that we talked to and heard from in the survey in wood products indicated that the industry struggles more than others with marketing career pathways and opportunities to young people. Next slide. So when we're examining a key pathway within wood products manufacturing, we can see that work experience is really highly valued for mobility. Material handler and production line workers are both entry-level positions. They don't require prior experience. But when you get to the team lead or the production supervisor level, they both require about 2 years, more than 2 years of experience. And given that we expect to see a number of retirements in the workforce, it's really important that not only are we addressing, where's that pipeline going to come from, but also training people in the increase in technology skills that are going to be required as the industry advances. Next slide. So now we'll look at the 2 necessary occupations, the first of which is childcare. And childcare workers in our study, we consider them as workers in a number of settings, including daycare, home-based providers, and preschools. And they all play a really vital role, not only in supporting the development of children, but also enabling their parents to go to work. And the most prevalent challenges in childcare, as you might expect, are low pay, high cost, and a limited availability of quality care. Oregon's actually in the 15 states with the highest proportion of individuals facing childcare deserts. It's about 60% of people. Next slide. So childcare is often a starting position for other occupations that are upwardly mobile, even if it doesn't necessarily offer as much mobility itself. And it also is providing pathways into fields that are experiencing their own labor shortages, like nurses and teachers. And while we don't want to draw workers away from childcare given the shortage, there's an opportunity here to position childcare as a stepping stone within that pathway to other promising careers to potentially widen the pool of those interested in childcare opportunities. Next slide. So for heavy and trailer truck drivers, heavy and tractor trailer truck drivers, the occupational clusters made up of 3 different groups: heavy tractor trailer truck drivers, industrial truck and tractor operators, and light truck drivers. And there's been strong growth here throughout the pandemic, with most employers reporting mild labor shortages, which we saw were attributed to a limited career ladder, low wages, and high cost to reskilling and upskilling. Next slide. So this is looking at results from our survey. Trucking employers reported that reskilling and upskilling is a more significant factor impacting their labor than other surveyed employers. And it's critical as the technology, particularly in this space and industry, directly impacts the need for drivers to adjust to these new systems that are being put on the road, such as route optimization and assisted driving technologies. The specific reskilling and upskilling challenges that people reported included motivating the employees to participate in upskilling challenges, balancing the needs to upskill workers with the economic demands of keeping the business going in the meantime. And also the employers have reported some challenges with actually assessing their own strengths and gaps to understand what kind of upskilling should we do. So next, I'd like to present some key findings from that employer survey, where we asked a series of questions to gauge how businesses perceive workforce programs and organizations within the state. So this is based on over 200 responses from members of the Oregon business community. So when asked about the issue of program alignment with, yeah, we go to the next slide. With labor needs, the most prevalent survey responses for each industry, for health sciences, IT analytical instruments, they were somewhat aligned. And also for construction and wood products manufacturing, they were not at all aligned. And childcare and truck drivers, those occupations both reported being somewhat aligned. Next slide. So on the business survey, we asked two key questions. The familiarity ranking on the left is based on responses to the question, are you familiar with the various workforce organizations and programs listed? And the valuableness ranking on the right is the weighted average of responses among respondents who were aware of the program that was being asked about. And they were asked, how well do the workforce organizations and programs meet your needs? We can see on the right that those programs that were rated most valuable include on-the-job training, the workshop program, and the Oregon apprenticeship program. And this graphic can really be used as a tool to guide which programs may need stronger marketing, such as those with higher valuableness rankings, but lower familiarity rankings, like the Jobs Plus program. And this indicates that the program is not well known, but the employers who do use it find it really valuable. We can also use this chart to identify programs that are well known and potentially may have an easier time gaining traction and participation, but they may need better support to align with industry needs. However, valuableness does vary by respondent industry. For example, the WorkSource Oregon iMatch Skills online system was identified by trucking employers as one of the most valuable resources for their labor needs. Next slide. I'm sorry. So finally, I'd like to share our recommendations based on our assessment. Oregon has largely overcome the labor market challenges from the 2019 pandemic. And beyond recovery, the state has experienced really significant growth in increasingly technological intensive industries that offer opportunities for upward mobility. Oregon's really well poised for long-term economic prosperity in our assessment, but it faces pressures that need to be addressed. And so the recommendations here support Oregon's workforce goals of ecosystem alignment, equitable prosperity for all Oregonians, and supporting individuals along the career pipeline. Next slide. So our first set of recommendations are what we call strategy 1, aligning and strengthening Oregon's workforce ecosystem. Oregon's workforce ecosystem includes several partners with various goals and needs, and the strategy includes action items that bolster the alignment of these partners and improve the infrastructure of workforce development ecosystem through new initiatives and increased collaboration. So these recommendations are, number 1, to reinforce the WTDB as Oregon's centralized workforce authority. This is the vision, goals, and strategies for workforce development across the state, and has the authority to hold multiple state, regional, and local agencies accountable. Number 2, to develop and maintain a data repository for local and regional workforce partners to contribute collected program data, and to develop a statewide dashboard for sharing this information. Number 3, to establish standardized frameworks and practices for data collection and reporting across workforce development programs. Number 4, to promote greater engagement and collaboration between K-12, higher education, other local partners, and industry. And number 5, to provide training and resources for educators to stay up to date on industry trends and technology. Next slide. So for strategy 2, we have promoting the efforts that increase workforce development access and equity for all Oregonians. Workers across the geographically and culturally diverse state, we recognize have unique needs and challenges that impact their ability to further their education and careers. And so this strategy is developed to address those and involves action items that improve workforce development across access and equity through custom programs and investments. And so the recommendations for this strategy are number 1, to explore augmented reality and virtual reality learning models that would allow education and training institutions to bring in experienced teachers to rural and underserved communities that may struggle with access to equipment and educators. Number 2, to educate employers in biases and hiring practices and to promote inclusive recruitment and selection processes. Number 3, to expand financial assistance programs and to help individuals cover training costs, tuition, and certification fees. Number 4, to establish workforce partnerships with grassroots and nonprofit entities to make connections with economically underrepresented Oregonians, to provide touch points and access to their other target industries in Oregon. Number 5, to offer transportation assistance programs to help rural workers access training and employment opportunities. Number 6, to implement strategies to increase the affordable housing supply, including incentives for developers, rent control, and investment in low-income housing products. And number 7, to develop policies and initiatives to increase access to affordable childcare, which may include subsidies for low-income families and support for childcare providers to expand their capacity. Next. And finally, our third strategy is to support Oregon's target industries and occupations through attraction, retention, and lifelong learning initiatives. And as Oregon's economy continues its economic growth, the workforce needs are rapidly shifting, and the state is experiencing shortages in key occupations that we discovered. So this strategy includes action items that support career pathways and transitions for learners and workers, as well as action items that can boost worker attraction and retention for crucial industries and jobs, which may address some of those demographic changes discussed earlier. So the recommendations for this strategy are number 1, to expand access to supplemental digital literacy, STEM, and employability education programs for K-12 students to combat pandemic learning loss and to ensure a skilled workforce equipped to meet the demands of Oregon's industries. Number 2, to institute a talent attraction program with diverse strategies, including marketing and incentives. Number 3, to work closely with target industry employers and develop and update industry recognized credentials to align with workforce needs. Number 4, to expand opportunities for degree and certification attainment. And number 5, to adapt and scale existing employer-central training programs like Intel's Quick Start with PCC and other target industries. So those are our major recommendations from our assessment. So thank you all for your time and attention. And I really appreciate your interest and engagement. I'm happy to take any questions.
What questions do you have for Annie?
It was pretty fast, so I don't really have.
Hopefully it wasn't, for some of you, it wasn't new news because we heard it at the Talent Summit. But was there anything between then, if you were there, and today that's like still kind of wondering about this thing? Or do you feel like you're ready to vote to accept the results of the assessment? Or see a hand up, but I can't see whose it is. Craig.
Thank you. Yeah, I think one of the things that occurs to me as we go through this assessment and analysis of supporting it is, do we have any sense of what it costs? I mean, we're putting a burden of a lot of this on the taxpayers, of course. And so the question is there an analysis of the costs over a given period of time?
I don't know the answer to that.
Craig, give me a little bit more substance in terms of what you're asking in your question. You mean overall cost we can give you in terms of the contract that we awarded and spent down with SRI, but are you sort of driving at, what about staff cost? What about?
No, I'm talking about all the recommendations and any kind of an analysis.
Okay, got you.
Deliver that. We're not going to do it in 1 year. We're going to do it over a period of what, 10 years. But you know, there should be some analysis that all of us can turn to our constituents and taxpayers and say, here's what we think it costs for these investments. For these.
Well, that's really good
recommendations.
input. And Anne was going to give me a little bit of time, but if it's okay with you,
No,
just
go
take it
for it.
right now. So one of the things we struggle with, as you all know, is we do these wonderful reports and these wonderful projects. And then what? We read them, we approve them, think they're exciting, but then what? So we're asking ourselves at the agency that right now, and we're having conversations with Jennifer Purcell and her team over at Future Ready Oregon, particularly around the healthcare manufacturing and technology consortia work that they're doing. And they're going to be taking the results of the talent assessment and other data that they're collecting in other ways through other strategies and taking a deeper dive, particularly in what they're learning from the talent assessment, and then figuring out strategies on, what do we do? So that is also just to kind of connect things for you, because this gets kind of complex. There's all these different moving parts. Remember a while back upstream, partners helped us develop the 5 joint priorities that we landed on to further focus those items that are included in our one-page strategic plan. Refine, focus a little bit, intentionally and prioritize. So then you'll remember at the Talent Summit, we worked with SRI and the event coordinator to have everybody get on there, get that, what was it called? Slido app on their phone, and then prioritize the recommendations that Annie just went over. So our hope initially here right out of the gate, Craig, is to take this once it's hopefully approved, the joint priorities and then prioritization of these recommendations, along with that deeper dive in the consortiums or consortia, I guess is the right word, and begin to better understand potential strategies for investments and focus and perhaps legislative action, not sure. But thanks for that, Craig, because we can interject into those conversations. Hey, how can we begin to think about forecasting costs around some of this stuff? I don't know what'll happen, but I'm happy to do that as soon as we get back to the office and come back to y'all with what we discovered initially.
Yeah, and I was going to say, just as an agency that administers some things, this is useful to me when we go back in terms of if these are the board's adopted priorities for workforce development for what we focus on. I would not, other than talking to the trucking industry more to find out why they love IMAT skills, so we keep that with them.
Gotta pay.
But for the rest of the industry, we're focused right now on replacing it, which this helps us know that we're on the right track and focus on the right things. I do think there's probably some deeper discussion because this group doesn't get to give money to people directly,
Right.
But I think talking about how as an oversight entity, it can help push, maybe share with legislators, with agencies, with others that are pushing money out, what the priorities are, how it aligns, and then for the accountability part, trying to loop back to these priorities also.
Yeah, I like that. Well said. Somebody else Charlie, is that you?
Yeah,
It's like you
thank
ever
you,
have
Ann.
that?
Yeah, what I would, I guess, and it's partially to Craig's answer, the way I interpret this is it's somewhat advisory. And because it is advisory, one of the things I think I'd recommend, and this may be a staff piece or it may be a subcommittee, is really do a crosswalk with this to our existing strategy or strategies, potentially into some areas. And then it appears through David's conversation and so forth, that some of these elements actually may belong to some of our agency partners that are sitting around this table. And therefore you could actually do a map to say, okay, David, this is going to pitch to you because you are working and controlling this kind of access or data or so forth. For instance, the IMAT skills and so forth. But I would see it as advisory. And again, before approval, I think the one thing I'm suggesting then is I think there is action that needs to be taken, intentional, to do that crosswalk and to make sure that then there either is or is not good alignment in what we're working with here. So.
Good. Thank you for that. Heather, did you have your hand up?
I did, but I also want us to stay on time. So I just wanted to put out there that I believe that the number of businesses that were reached out to, and Annie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but is less than 1% of the businesses in Oregon for kind of the opinion pieces. So I just kind of want to put a caveat on that. And with that said, I would like to make a motion to accept this plan or assessment, I should say. And Annie, if I'm wrong about that, the percentage of Oregon businesses, please correct me, but that's my understanding. You're muted.
Our response rate was, I think, 1 or 2%. So we reached out to many, many more than actually responded.
But you didn't reach out to every business, right?
No,
So
no.
it was, right. So.
Thank you. Good question, and thank you for the motion. And do I have a second on that?
I second.
Thank you. Any more discussion? All right, with that, I'm going to call for the vote. Please, all in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? And has anyone abstained? All right, thank you for that. While I have you all here, I think we'll go ahead and do approval of the minutes from March 8th. Do I have a motion for approval on those?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it, Sherry.
Thanks, Sherry. Or any discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And has anyone abstained? All right. Done. Thank you for that. We're going to have one more item that's going to require approval. So please stay with us. Next, thank you, Annie, very much for your presentation. Oh, and Todd, you're back on.
Thank you. Just a bit of housekeeping. You may have noticed as you reviewed the minutes that you just approved, and thank you very much. There was a piece in there for follow-up on the WTDB scorecard. We anticipated that we would have all the data clean and ready to go from HEC Research. We had most of it, but didn't quite get what we needed for wages and job placement. So I've been assured by reliable sources that in the next few weeks we will. So I'll look to not wait until September to bring that back to our next quarterly meeting, but bring it to July exec so the executive team can get a look at what we're sort of evolving to. That will continue to be a evolving project, I think, for quite some time. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you for that update. Okay, Clay, you are up next to talk about local planning and strategic innovation grants for approval. And as I mentioned, once he's done with that, I'll be looking for a motion to approve all 9 local plans submitted by the 9 local workforce development boards.
Well, and just a quick clarification, we will also be asking separately for approval of the strategic innovation grants.
Yes, thank you for that.
So first of all, apologies that I'm not there in person. I would be normally, but for a variety of reasons, I am joining you virtually, and I will bring up this presentation. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about local plans and carry forward through to the end for the approval of local plans. It's going to cover sort of the local planning process and how we moved through the process, how local plans were developed, how they were reviewed, and then finally the recommended action. So first of all, sort of the overall process or framework that we had for local planning. Local planning is required by the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act every 4 years, and every 4 years within every 4 years, there's a 2-year check-in point or a modification opportunity. You can modify a local plan or a state plan for that matter at any time, but there are these 2 formal places where planning has to happen. The planning that we have completed for state planning is on the same timeline as the local planning. So first of all, we take a look at the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, or WIOA, and we pull from that the things that are required for the plan under the law. And there are certain things that we have to ask or that local boards have to cover within their local plans. And this is shared in a template that separates these into 2 categories of questions or items that need a response from local boards. There's strategic items and there are operational items. And this template was shared with the local boards last fall, and they had an opportunity from that point forward to begin sort of formally putting together their plan. But I want to acknowledge that most of the local boards, if not all of them, probably started local planning before we sent them the template because the process of engaging partners, the process of having these conversations sometimes takes more time than we would formally give them in this process. We sent them guidance that included the template itself. We provided training on the template and answered questions along the way to make sure that all of local boards had the information that they needed to complete the plan. At the local board level, all of the local boards responded to the WTDB strategic plan and the joint priorities, and of course, very importantly, their local priorities. This was part of the template that we produced and distributed to local boards. All local plans engaged a broad spectrum of partners. This is an expectation of WIOA, but it's also an expectation of the template that we sent out. And of course, all local boards are I mean, that's sort of their, they have a very high and important, they place a very high and important focus on engaging partners as a part of this planning process. All local plans had a public comment period. It's required that it be at least 30 days. But that's kind of a little bit, that doesn't indicate the engagement that actually most local boards, I should say all local boards had when I was talking about their engagement of partners. In many cases, this is additional sort of public comment, the whole discussion, the engagement of partners, that's all a public comment process, a public participation process. But the requirement is for a formal 30-day period after the plan has been posted. Finally, all local plans were completed and submitted on or before the deadline. And they can be found online by following the link. This presentation is included in your packet. Go to the next one. Review. We had 4 teams of reviewers. We had WTDB members who participated in reviewing the vision and leadership portion of the plan. We had staff at the WTDB reviewing data analysis and alignment and improvement portions of the plan. We had staff in OE reviewing services and activities, and also staff in OE reviewing the compliance piece. All local boards responded to questions and clarifications that were submitted, and they resubmitted material when that was asked for or necessary. So these various reviews generated a small amount of questions or comments that needed some response from a local board, and then they were able to provide that response, and all local boards have responded to those. And finally, we have all of the plans have their reviews completed, and it is our recommendation that the WTDB approve all 2024, 2020, or 2028 WEO local plans for all local workforce development boards. And that's it. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions or comments?
From a local board perspective, I thought Clay did a good job on the whole process this year. Thank you, Clay.
And from listening to it, I appreciate you outlining it. Thank you, Clay.
Welcome.
Although I have to say, you look like you're in a really sketchy laboratory right now, or a dark
Well,
room.
you
I
know,
just had to
I
say
almost-
it. I'm sorry.
No,
On the Shutter Channel.
I totally understand that. I don't know why. I'm really not in a cave. But somehow this is the way
We're relieved
the
to know
camera
you're
shows
not in a
up.
cave.
Well, at least he does.
Just as long as it's not a whiskey library,
1925.
Clay.
Yeah,
The real
Wants to
reason.
make
he's
it-
not here.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, there it is. It's much.
You're coming into color. One mention of the whiskey library and all of a sudden everything gets fixed.
Password. All right, then with no questions, I think then I'm looking for a motion to approve all 9 local workforce plans submitted by the 9 local workforce development.
So
Also
moved.
moved. Charlie Hopewell.
What's the second?
I'll second. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. All right, any discussion? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? And has anyone abstained?
Heather Ficht is abstaining.
I get that. Thank you for that. All right. Clay, sorry. I think the second is to talk about the strategic innovation grants, correct?
Yes, and so I will jump into that. So today, I will make a modest friendly amendment to something David Gerstenfeld said earlier. The WTDB does not award funding except here. So this is the one place where we do. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the strategic innovation grants. So we have sort of evolved the strategic innovation or SIG scope of work to include a variety of these things. And this most recent iteration, we have always referenced the strategic plan as a foundation that we expect the grant applications to respond to the strategic plan. This go around, we added the joint priorities. They were available and completed by the time that we released the request for application. And so those two things were key as a part of the scope of work that we expected all grant applications to include. Innovation, it's in the name, and it's a very important part of the grant application process. It's a very important part of what we hope to gain from the projects that are ultimately funded. And these projects can be a variety of different things that focus on participant education and training, work experience opportunities, employment opportunities, or all of the above. And many of the grants do focus in these areas. In this particular innovation grant iteration, we also included partner engagement as an eligible expense and system infrastructure development as an eligible expense. And this was in response to the joint priorities that were included in the scope of work. Then I see I can't even run my own slides. There we go. So the process itself, we released the request for application in December of last year. We had a significant record of 41 applications submitted. In the past, I think we were in the teens probably. And so this was a significant increase, which I'll be honest, caught us by surprise. And so it took us longer to review the applications than we anticipated. The requests were about $5 million above the amount that we had available for award. So this interest was extraordinary, and we were very pleased with that. And I think, and I hope that we will be able to replicate that into the future. The review process was completed at the end of April, and we are recommending that 8 grants go forward for award. Those are Central Oregon Community College, East Cascades Works, Home Plate Youth Services, Onward Eugene, Opportunity Oregon, POIC and Rosemary Anderson High School, Portland Youth Builders, the contingent. Now, these are, I listed these in alphabetical order, but it's interesting the way that the locations kind of grouped up. So we had East Cascades area, the Deschutes County, Bend area, Washington County, Lane County, a couple of awards, and Multnomah County, a few awards. And the total is $1.2 million that we're recommending for award, which is also the highest amount that the WTDB has awarded for these grants. The one last thing I'll say is that I would like to provide you with sort of a summary of each of these grants. You don't have it today, obviously, but I'd like to provide you with a summary of each of these grants, just so you know the type of work that they'll be completing over the next several months. They have from the award date to the end of June a year from now to expend the funds. And so I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Clay, this is Sherry. I'm sorry. You may have already said this. I just brain dropped out. It says 2023 to 2025. Aren't we in 2024? I'm confused.
Good catch, Sherry.
Oh, okay. I was like, I don't know, maybe it's like retroactive.
It is 2023 to 2025. That's the biennium that we're in. And and ideally, we would have funded these probably in late 23. But a variety of things conspired against us. And so here we are in 2024. So good catch.
Anything else, Clay?
Do they know?
Go ahead, Sherry.
I think you're muted, Sherry.
No. No.
Okay.
I don't know what's going on. Yeah, I'm not.
I can hear you, Sherry.
Oh.
Now I can.
Now I can't. Okay, there you go.
The grantees are aware. I'm going to anticipate your question, Sherry. I think I'm going to hopefully get it right. They are aware that they're being recommended for award. They are aware of the time frame in which they have to expend the funds, and we are going to backdate the eligible expenses at least until probably the beginning of April, so that they'll have a somewhat longer period to expend the money, even though they probably won't get a contract for a few weeks.
will you be pinky swearing with us that you will reimburse us if we spend money before we have a contract?
Well, I don't know that I can pinky swear. I would
Yeah,
just.
good answer. You're being recorded.
Talk to me offline, Heather.
Question.
I don't know, Heather, you have a lot of witnesses here.
Where's that WTDB trust thing, Heather? Come on now.
All right. Any more questions? If not, I'm looking for a motion to approve the list. And then Sherry said she will need to abstain from the vote as she worked with the contingent. Okay, thank you for that.
I'll move to approve. This is Charlie.
Thanks, Charlie.
Second, Craig Campbell.
Thank you, Craig. All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And we know Sherry's abstaining. Is anyone else abstaining?
Lori Chesley, I'm abstaining.
Heather Fick is
And-
abstaining.
I want to say out loud here that my good colleague Heather Fick told me, Lori, you're on our board. You should have abstained from the previous vote. So I would like to change my yes to an abstention for the other.
Okay, thank you for
Thanks,
that. Appreciate that. And we will correct the record accordingly. All right. Then Clay, you've got your vote. And we look forward to the summary of about each one of those. Thank you for that offer. Okay. Our last item of the day. So our good friend and colleague, Janelle Ives, who's the director of secondary post-secondary transitions team at the Oregon Department of Education, and her colleague, Shali Hodgson, will present with Janelle today. So with that, welcome, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much for having us. We're super excited to talk about career technical education, which is an opportunity to unite our work, innovate, and be very responsive to the needs of our community. I'm going to let Shali, my partner at the HEC, again, a great partnership that we have in an ongoing way, kick us off. And I think you have our slides, correct?
I believe so.
You want me to wait for the slides or just jump in?
I think maybe, hopefully the slides are coming. Otherwise, I can always bring my computer up there.
Okay. Well, I'll introduce myself while we're waiting. Hi, everyone. I know many of you, but my name is Shali Hodson, and I'm a policy advisor in the Office of Community Colleges and Workforce Development at the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. And I am really pleased to be here with Janelle today. We've been going around doing this presentation for a bit now, and really happy to be sharing information about our partnership and the work we've been doing over the past year on the CTE state plan and CTE in general.
A quick comment. Sorry to interrupt. I don't have slides for you. I have the CTE plan. Is that what you were hoping to pull up?
No, I sent
okay.
the slides over. They were.
I only received the CTE state plan, the 2024-27.
The link that I sent was the slides.
Janelle, can you plug in over at over where Sydney is? Okay, my apologies. I'm leaving again.
Actually logged in over.
Not logged in.
I put the link in the chat if that's helpful.
Are we started on our state plan, Shali? All right. Oh, wait, now you want me to see Shali.
So Anne, are you adding to their time allotment?
Oh,
because of
good. So
technical
that
difficulties?
unplugs us from everything. I could.
Thank you, Charlie. I appreciate your advocacy.
Everything you speak, and then I'll go on here when I'm gonna look in your email.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
Okay. Without further delay, I'll get
Wait,
into
now
it.
the sound is off.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead and start, Shali, and from your slides, and then we'll get the slides up on that.
Okay, sounds good. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Yeah. Okay, awesome. So as I said, we are really excited to be here with you today to share an update on the CTE state plan. This is a plan that was adopted by the State Board of Education in April of this year and has been submitted to the U.S. Department of Education for their review and approval. It is both the strategic plan for CTE and implementation and expansion of CTE in our state, and meets the compliance requirements for federal Perkins funding, which is the funding that supports CTE in our state from the federal government. This plan, as you will see, is focused on alignment, strengthening systems, and supporting students. Next slide, please. The plan is really a continuation. That's why we call it a revised plan, but it's a continuation of the 2020-2024 state plan with revisions based on what we've learned over the past several years and a lot of input from partners and communities across the state. This really included intentional engagement with educators, families, administrators, and other partners who provided input to support greater alignment and that ongoing collaboration that's so important to education.
Thank you.
Additionally, the plan is aligned to other state plans, including Every Student Succeeds Act and the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And I think he might be gone, but I'd like to give a shout out for Clay, because Clay helped us on our steering committee for this plan and was a really great partner in helping us do that alignment and collaboration. And so that was really important to us to do the alignment between agencies, because CTE is a collaboration at the local level between high schools, community colleges, business and industry, and many other partners. And so for us, it was incredibly important and has been for years to model that at the state agency level and include our partners. Next slide. The vision that was laid out in 2020 is being carried forward because it's a big vision and we are continuing to work to achieve it. This vision really supports the continuation of the plan and sets a bold goal for CTE in our state. And that goal supports students, empowers communities, and has hopefully a positive impact on our economy as we continue to work to implement CTE in our state. And now I'm going to hand things to Janelle to get a little deeper into the details.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about what CTE is, a program of study. And this is an aligned sequence of courses between high school and college. And the whole theory behind it, that it's based on industry needs and that it really accelerates the learning because there's a seamless transition and you don't have to duplicate courses as you move through the experiences. Next slide, please. So we are required and we have built a lot of quality structures around CTE programs. These have been around for decades and decades and decades with ongoing improvements, but they're always aligned to labor market needs. They always have that secondary, post-secondary components. They really are driven by business and industry skill sets. And I'll talk a little bit more about our hope for the future around that. They include advising, student leadership, work-based learning, and they have teachers who are really embedded and understand the profession. Forward. We approve at the state both all of the secondary and post-secondary ones. So these are some of the courses that come through our agencies at a time. This is a growth of high school CTE programs in Oregon. We had a huge drop in 2005 with some lack of funding in the K-12 school system, but you can see we've had a steady increase with a really big bump when we had high school success money implemented. You can see a slight growth in there, and we've stabilized and really are pretty much at capacity right now with about 1,088 programs in Oregon high schools across the state. Go ahead to next slide, please. The outcomes you talk about, these, we're always measuring those late outcomes. Well, there's definitely late outcomes that we measure in CTE. We do have a 95 or higher graduation rate for CTE concentrators. We also have post-secondary students. We have really high 80, I can't read it, 81%, I think it says, of our post-secondary students are employed within 6 months after completing a CTE program. So we have really strong history of good outcomes. I would say on the leading measures, we also know that our CTE students in high schools attend at much higher rates than students who are not in CTE, and families who have their kids in CTE feel much more engaged with the schools. Next slide, please. CTE is really built about partnerships. It makes the work really hard. It makes the hard work for teachers. It makes the hard work for agencies who have to argue about how we share the money and how we do the work. It makes it hard for business and industry, but it really produces amazing results. And if you want to see an example of an amazing result that started in Lane and has expanded, I would encourage you to look at Oregon Team Builds, which is just this beautiful alignment between business, industry, college, workforce development, K-12, and we can really have some amazing transformative experiences, not only for learners, but for communities as well when this works well together. So we really promote partnerships, and we try to also focus on diversity. These are some of our rural pre-apprenticeship programs. We also partner really closely with BOLI. Go ahead, next slide. 2020, we heard loud and clear that there needs to be some more consistency on this. We are tired of every local school making their own CTE programs of study. So we started a process in Oregon to go to statewide models of programs of study and having some statewide models, which is not the way Oregon usually does things, but it has had some huge benefits. It had a really rocky start. I'm not going to lie. This was not an easy lift to start with, but we are now in 2024, and by next spring, we will have statewide models in every of our career clusters. And we are now starting professional learning communities for those statewide models. And what we're hoping to find are some industry advisory at the state level to inform those statewide models and make sure they're keeping up to the needs of the business and industry as well. Next slide. We also heard loud and clear, it is too late to start career exploration in high school. We absolutely, every meeting I go to with business and industry partners, they say, I have a great career, I have a great industry. How do I get kids to know about how wonderful it is to work in my industry? And so we have really worked hard to expand career awareness, exploration, preparation, and training through career connected learning. That was not something we talked about before 2020, and you may have heard about career connected learning in many places since then. So that is a relatively new 3-year project, but we're really trying to expand down those opportunities for people to become aware of the many wonderful things that we have in our state to pursue and explore, and have it be more equitable of who knows of those opportunities. Because right now it really depends on who your parents, families are, and who you're connected to. And every Oregonian should have those opportunities to learn about those career opportunities. Next slide. Since we've been investing in career connected learning, we've created career journeys. These are wonderful videos, journalistic videos that explore Oregon's pathways into careers. If you have not checked these out, and hopefully we'll send you these links to these slides so you can check these out. We've also created a career connected learning resource hub. It has a place for business and industry, teachers, community members, students, families to go in and learn more about the career opportunities. And we've really partnered with the Workforce Talent Development Board to expand those essential employability skills. We have the middle school employability skills courses. We're having courses for high school professional counselors, advisors to learn about them. We've also expanded work-based learning. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. We have navigators to help people navigate all the different systems in our region, because we do a lot of great work, but we don't do a lot of great work connecting all the great work. So we've hired these system navigators, and we've built a student advisory to make sure that we have student voice in these. And we just added another 11 members last week to our new student advisory, which is just exciting. Next slide. About work-based learning, when we started in 2020, this is not a measure we had been looking at or a requirement in our programs of study. So we thought, well, maybe we'll get to 5%, if students in our CTE programs participating in work-based learning. And as you can see, we were at 58, I cannot read it from here, 58% this past year of participation. And the most exciting thing is we are one of the most equitable states in who's participating in work-based learning. So some of our largest ethnic group that's participating is our Pacific Islanders, Native Hawaiians. You can see there are youth from migrant families are a really high participation. And we've been recognized nationally as one of the states that have implemented the most equitable work-based learning experiences in the country. So that's pretty exciting. You can see we've had amazing growth in this, and that is thanks to the partnership from our business and industry. Next slide. Turn it back to Shali.
All right, so we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the details in the state plan. This is just a timeline that was provided to us by our federal partners that really outlined how long they believed it would take to revise and redevelop a state plan, and they were right. We worked on it for just over a year, and it was a really great collaborative process, though, and I do want to share some more information about that. So next slide. We engaged a lot of people in this process as we worked to revise the plan. Engaging with communities across the state as was a priority, as I mentioned earlier. And this slide really shows a summary of all the people we talked with or heard from in surveys and other ways of engaging. And that engagement was utilized. We used it to shape the strategies and activities that were included in the plan. And we'll go to the next slide and talk about the outcomes, and then I'll share some more about those strategies and activities. So the outcomes for this plan, I think we had 5 outcomes in the 2020 plan. And so we went down to 3 outcomes and really got focused. And so these outcomes are focused on integrating career-connected learning and CTE with education and workforce development. So that intentional connection back to workforce development and the work of this board, increasing equitable access to the programs, to CTE, career-connected learning, and high-quality CTE. And then expanding communication, transparency, and the diversity of voices and contributors to our partnerships. This was really important because we had done this intentional engagement and didn't want to lose that and the value of that. And so that was a key outcome for us. So next slide, we'll talk a little bit about some of the strategies. The outcomes are really supported by these strategies. And as we move into implementation, we'll be looking at how do we operationalize those strategies, who needs to be at the table, what does this look like as we go forward for the next several years. So as we continue the work of integrating career-connected learning and CTE with education and workforce development, we will really focus on aligning systems and leveraging resources and really creating that space to focus on middle school career exploration and planning. Like Janelle was talking about, the younger we can engage these concepts, the better. And we hope that in doing so, we will work and hopefully increase students' awareness of career pathways and navigation into careers and help them make better decisions as they go through high school and into higher education if that's their path. This is really all about this outcome, and these strategies are all about workforce readiness, career readiness, and includes that focus on the essential employability skills, which I know is a priority of yours. And as we work with providers to expand the use of essential employability skills and ensure that programs are supporting the development of those skills, we really want to make sure that's integrated with our CTE programs and career-connected learning. Next slide. Our second outcome is about equity. This is an intentional focus on increasing equitable access. We will center that work around equity, learner experience, and outcomes. These strategies and ideas will drive resource prioritization and decision-making. We'll also work to strengthen CTE program of study quality, continuing to work on some of those regional and statewide models. And that's really a part of supporting educator recruitment and retention efforts, ensuring that we have the educators to teach these programs and to help our students learn the skills that they need to be successful in their career. And also ensuring that CTE programs are flexible while again maintaining that focus on quality. So we're having lots of conversations about what does this look like in the rural areas, what does this look like for online schools and some of those different models in our state. Next slide, please. And finally, with our third outcome, we're really focused on that expanding communication, transparency, and diversity of voices doesn't just stop with the approval of the plan. We really want to ensure that these intentional connections help us continue to pursue that meaningful collaboration with our local communities and students As Janelle mentioned, we now have a student advisory council, which includes secondary and post-secondary students, and they've been an amazing voice in helping shape this plan and in doing this work. We're also working on creating a measure of career and college readiness, and I know that's something that's important to this board as well. And we hope to collaborate with you so that measure encompasses multiple factors to ensure really that equitable approach to preparing learners as they move to their next step after high school and adult literacy. And the adult literacy piece is fairly new in this plan, but it's a really important transition point for adults who are working on their GED or learning English language skills to be able to participate in CTE and other programs. All right, I'm going to turn it back to Janelle to talk about performance.
Yeah, this is the fun part. This plan also serves as our application for federal money. So there are some requirements along that. And one of that is we get to report lots of data. So again, as Ben said, we have lots of data. It's not always presented in a very usable way back to Oregonians. So that is something that's been in our plan for the past 4 years, but is definitely going to get done this next time around, is to build a data dashboard. But I did want to share with you some of our accountability metrics that we have to report on, including our work-based learning. We have to do academic performance, program completion. We follow our high school students, so we look at where they go after. So we dip into the longitudinal data system to find out where our CTE concentrators go. And we know that they go on to college just as likely as anybody else. And they, on average, when they turn into adults 6 years after graduation, they are earning $2,000 to $3,000 more than their non-CTE counterparts. So there is a lot of return on investment in CTE programs. Next slide, please. So we are now starting to think about implementing this next 4 years of plan. We're going to have a meeting this August, because it's not just about our agencies, the HEC and ODE, doing the work. This is really the work of Oregon to really build these career pathways and this talent development across our state. And so we're going to be planning with other leaders across the state. How are you going to implement this? And what are our priorities going to be for this year? Because as you saw, those 3 outcomes are big. We're not going to achieve them in 4 years. I mean, wish we could. Yeah. Most likely we're not going to achieve them in 4 years, but where are we going to focus? So we can all collectively, like, what individually are you going to do? What is your institution going to do? And what are we going to do systemically together to move this plan forward? We're going to come away from that with some strategies and activities, and we're going to give an annual update on the plan and next steps and our priorities as we move forward. Next slide, please. Again, opportunities for industry advisories. This board is really important. You do a lot of great work with workforce development. We are looking to try to create some advisories for our statewide programs so that we're not creating a separate system of our employers and these employers and have multiple systems, but how are we connecting to make sure that what we're doing in CTE is aligned to the priorities of the state. We will be adopting industry recognized credentials and looking for business and industry to accept those industry credentials. Are these the right ones? And to advise on priorities in CTE. We do have an advisory council, and there is crossover between our CTE Advisory Council and Workforce Talent Development Pipeline. I will also say nationally, they are redoing what we call the career clusters. Those are the industry sectors. So nationally, those have been released and they align very well with our work in Oregon. I'll be happy to share those with anyone who wants to give feedback, but PGE was very instrumental in working on that, our clean energy, and there is a new energy place in the clusters. So those are pretty exciting new thing that's happening. And that is really it for today. We wanted you to be aware of this new state plan, the connections it has to the board, the work that we're doing, and that we're eager to partner with you in moving this work forward as much as we can. And I'd be happy to, I know we're between you and lots of traffic driving, so.
Janelle, I have a question for you. Congratulations, lots of amazing success here. What, if you could think back on the work over the last, few years, what do you attribute, people understanding, I should go that pathway? Is it outreach to parents, outreach to educate, what's like, because we talk about like the need for better communication or branding and all kinds of forums that I'm in. It's like, what was your secret sauce?
I mean, I still don't think we found the secret sauce, and it really depends on the schools. I will say, you know, educators play a really important role in directing kids and having opportunities. Some of it, unfortunately, is random. So kids in their block schedule just randomly get assigned to a CTE class because there's an opening, and they're lucky and they find, oh, I love this, and they get involved. But a lot of schools have been really intentional about reaching out. We've done a lot of training with school counselors. I think parents are still an area we need to move into. There are a lot of bias against CTE in our state, I would say from all realms, or a lot of misconceptions about what career technical education is. And so, you know, we might have students who are really interested, but their family says, well, you really need to be on a 4-year university track. But really, CTE is everybody, and it's not exclusive of a 4-year university. And actually, it can help you focus your 4-year university and make it much more effective. I've had lots of students, they learn that they hate doing something in high school before they've spent a dime on the training. So I don't think we found the secret sauce, but I think states that have a coherent system of career guidance have a lot more success of having students move into that. And that is something I think Oregon's tried multiple times. Senate Bill 815, and like we've had lots of attempts at getting a coherent, cohesive like advising system, but career connected learning gives us potentially that pathway to get all together on the same board and start advising and sharing information about careers together.
Thank you.
Question about how you track the connection to employment. So been in youth work for a lot of years. The hardest thing to do once a kid graduates is and flips off that radar. Do they show up on the radar of college, or do they show up on the radar of workforce? If they show up on workforce, that lags a 12 to 18 months, right? How are you tracking who got employed and how long they've been employed? You said something like 6 years out.
Yeah, we looked at, that was research from Ed Northwest that they did for us a few years ago. We do for our post-secondary placement, which is a required reporting piece. We used to do it by a survey and we got like a 3% turn back. That was not the best way to do it. We now do a match through the state longitudinal data system with employment. It's not perfect because what shows up in the employment I would say is probably not 100% accurate, but it's way better than the 3% survey that we had before.
I was just curious. That is a tough one.
It is a tough, I'm really jealous. There's some other states that have amazing data systems where they're really tracking this well. And, HEC's new data dashboard, beautiful. Thank you. It's really helpful. I've used it like 50 times already. I'd love to have one too, but data is definitely, I think, one of those important pieces. And there are a lot of states that have really moved to that intentional, really looking at their CTE, workforce development, college and high school together. And we're going to hopefully move that direction.
Yeah.
I'd like to put a plug in if I can. First of all, to Janelle, because I serve also on the advisory committee, and to Shally both. Both of you continue to just exemplify the passion behind the story. And I can't tell you, there's not very many forums that I go to where I see either of these two great human beings that are not really putting their heart and soul out. So I want to thank both of you for that continued passion. The other part too is to WTDB members, particularly CBOs, as well as any of our business partners on the Workforce Talent Development Board. We are actually applying for an industry recognized credential for employability skills. And so part of that process is for business and industry to actually show their level of support in recognizing, appreciating, and supporting that. So what I'd like to do is put a selfless plug in to say anybody in business, industry, or CBOs out there that would like to author a support letter, please contact me immediately because we have an application that's going to be due by the end of the year.
Got it.
I heard you. Any other comments?
I was going to say, great work. I think this kind of models what we've been talking about with respect to the interplay between all of these different, what sometimes feels like disparate systems pulling together. I seem to recall some presentation that said even taking one CTE class creates higher graduation rates.
It does.
Yeah, and so got a kid who graduated from Benson. I've got a kid who had no CTE in his life, and let me just tell you, statistics bear out. And so I think I'm interested in what can we do to help drive that participation rate, knowing that it is an early predictor of later success. Because I think that gets to what I was talking about earlier is if we're outcome focused, how do we help drive the upstream actions that drive those outcomes?
Yeah.
How do we help say this is a good thing?
Yeah.
And whatever audience we're talking to, whether it's the schools to stand the programs up, or it's the parent, teacher, whatever's to explain, this is not shop. You know, like this is career connected learning, and this is what it means.
Yeah.
And then to the piece about the data, I think it was it Kentucky or Tennessee that present
Alabama.
Alabama.
Their skill.
Wow.
Yeah. They were impressive.
That was impressive. And that's the stuff we're talking about when it comes to creating that integrated understanding or insights into our community. How do we understand how they navigate through and where they're hitting walls and where they're having success? So we can support it or interrupt it.
Yep.
Redirect it.
And there are a lot of state models. I will just say like Idaho just got another like 71 million investment in CTE, but they actually track students and they have industry recognized credentials and skills, and they have a system that follows them, and they have money they can use to get post-secondary training or industry credentials. Every student gets a little bank account and they get to use that for their, so there are lots of systems out there. Yeah.
That's cool. I volunteered to host in December. So if I would love to show off some of the things that we're doing in our middle schools in Hillsborough, because we have action labs set up where students discover all the different CTE opportunities that are available at high school. So we're talking about upstream more and more and how to get the diversity of the students that we serve into the workforce in every different sector.
Yeah.
And so there are strategies that I'd love to share and talk about.
That would be great. All right, we're going to wrap. Thank you, Janelle and Charlie. That was really great. And Todd, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks for saying that, Travis. I was going to call that out. Appreciate you offering to host. In September, our next meeting, full board meeting, will be down in Albany at Knife River Corporation at their training center, which is absolutely amazing. I was just there for another thing that Chris Latimer, who is a board member now, invited me to. So please mark your calendars. You don't want to miss that one because it's a pretty amazing place. We're excited to have her host. Just a reminder for those of you, I know many of you are very intimately aware of what is on a one-page strategic plan, and you'll probably reflect as you think about, or maybe you were doing this during the meeting, that pretty much everything you heard about and what we voted on is directly from that strategic plan. So new folks, I'd encourage you to go to the website and look under About Us, and you can see all of the different themes and action items that we're knocking off pretty well. I think we're on track. And then also flagging that strategic planning for the next biennium is coming around again. I had a great conversation with you, Kathy, at the Talent Summit about that. Any of the rest of you that would like to be involved in that, please let me know. So you'll be hearing more about in the next several months, or a few months. So that's all I had, Ann.
Awesome. All right, anything else for the good of the order? All right, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much for your engagement today.
Yes, you need today.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh, right on.
I just want to work here. I'm new.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Yeah, it's good seeing you.
Yeah. And you're going to take your trip in October, November?